Welcome to Homicide Life on the Set, a podcast about the Emmy Award-winning television show Homicide Life on the Street, with myself, Chris Carr, and Susan Ingram. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Homicide Life on the Set. So it's our 1 year anniversary. Susan, how are you doing?
Woohoo! 1 year anniversary. We made it.
We've done it. Yeah.
It's kind of hard to believe, isn't it?
I know. It is crazy, isn't it? To think there's been a year now and we've done so many interviews. I'm like, wow, it's all a bit of a crazy blur in a good way, but you know.
Yeah. But also, I think we should also acknowledge 2 years working on it because we put in almost a year of developing and figuring out what we were doing and contacting people. And, and thanks to your lovely wife, we have these great graphics. Thank you, Andy, for the awesome music.
Yeah.
So it also marks our 2 year since Chris emailed me out of the blue and wanted to just talk about how Homicide was shot. And that was the impetus for the podcast, which has really just been a gift. I mean, thank you so much.
Well, thank you.
Because if you had not emailed me, this would not be happening.
Well, if you hadn't replied, it wouldn't be happening either.
Right, exactly.
So thank you.
Right, and apparently some people did not reply. I think you said you sent out a couple of emails.
Yeah. No, I think
I would love to hear who didn't reply that we can razz on now.
Luckily for those people, my memory is so poor I actually can't remember anymore. But I did email a few people in the various kind of positions in the camera department, and a few directors actually as well, just out of interest.
Oh, really? I don't think.
Yeah. And nobody got back to me other than you. So,
is this like? Oh, somebody emailed me. I was like,
but it's great. I'm glad
so
it happened that way. It's some of the best sort of friendships do happen that way. Through random encounters, etc. It's been really cool. It's been
somebody
a
wants
wild
to talk
ride.
to me. I'll email them back. But also, I think, and I do sort of analyze this in my head a little bit. I do think for me specifically, unlike many other people we've interviewed and many of the people on the show, that I walked off that set, whatever it was, in the middle of season 7. That was the last thing I did in the business, except for I did do some small projects around here with Todd Evans, who was our loader, who was also shooting some independent things himself. But that was the last thing I did in the business. And I think it's stuck with me maybe more heavily than other people that went on to do these incredible other 30 years of other projects and big movies, and obviously other TV shows, other Tom Fontana projects, other David Simon projects, but that maybe I answered because I was like, that because I still do miss being in the business.
And it was around the 30th anniversary of the show starting filming, wasn't it? Because obviously for me, the 30th anniversary is 2024 because I first saw it in 1934, but it was filming in 1992, if I remember correctly. So
3, I think, was the first
1993. Yeah.
Maybe we were shooting before 3.
Yeah. So for you, it was kind of like the 30th anniversary.
Absolutely.
And so I could imagine. Yeah, I'm a person that likes to reminisce about things. So timing, etc. If you catch the person at the right moment. It's been nice to share a journey with you because obviously this has been a very personal journey for you. I'm the outsider looking in, but for you, you're reconnecting with
Not
people.
anymore, Chris.
No, it's true. I've sort of somehow become a guest star in the history of Homicide now, which has been good. So no, it's been amazing. What an experience it's been, and obviously being able to visit Baltimore, etc., was truly mind blowing last year. I mean, it was as I jokingly say to some people, it's the most Baltimore experience I could have had, because there I am with the cast and crew of Homicide outside what was the Homicide building in
Yeah.
Baltimore. You can't really beat that. So it was a real wild ride, really. So just before we start our chat between ourselves, I just want to point out we'll be taking a mini break and taking April off. So there won't be an episode in April, but we will return in May, and we will be returning on the 15th of May, which is a Thursday, and that'll be the second Thursday of each month, and that'll be our pattern going forward. So keep an eye out for us on the 15th of May, and we will be back.
Not to ramble on, but I was watching. I was telling you, I've been re-binging, and I watched the episode, and I should have the names in front of me. I don't remember the title. The one where the little cadre of spy wannabes.
Oh, yes.
And the guy that gets buried alive.
Yeah.
On the parade grounds of Fort Holabird.
That's it.
Which, when Chris came to visit, Chris wanted to visit Fort Holabird, not only, and I don't think I remembered that it was actually in an episode. Chris wanted to visit because it was a spy school in the 70s, 60s and 70s.
Oh, from World War II till the 70s. Yeah.
World War II. It was originally was it originally a hospital, and then parts of it turned into the spy school?
I think the military intelligence took it over, and it became this sort of spy school.
So I'm watching that episode last night, and there's the only remaining building of the complex, and also only remaining building that was the spy school, which is now a veterans clubhouse. I don't know if it's still in use, but so when Chris came to visit, we went to Fort Holabird, which was right across the street from Jimmy's Famous Seafood, where he got his taste of steamed crabs for the first time.
Yeah, so crabs and spies is a good combination.
And so there's the building. I mean, I totally had forgotten that we had shot there, although I think that was, I was not, season 6, I think between episodes 9 and 14, something like that, I was on the John Waters film. They let me jump off and do something else and come back. So I don't think I actually worked on that episode, but it was fun to see that, and the fact that we had actually visited it when you came to town. So you really got the Cook's tour, the Ingram tour.
Yeah, it was fantastic. It was fantastic driving around and walking around, and then in the harbour, seeing what I've dubbed Mahoney Towers now. It's the Luther Mahoney building. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And I just watched that again.
No, it was so cool. I mean, it's so surreal, because for me, because it's weird, because when, being in England and your only experience of Baltimore is watching this TV show, so everything is sort of connected to that. So when you finally go there, it's such a weird experience to suddenly actually physically being there. It's a bit, for me, it's an equivalent of when, because we have a lot of historic buildings in the UK, with a bit of imagination, you can kind of take yourself, read all these history books about these important conversations that happen in X, Y, or Z castle or whatever, and then you go there, and it's a bit like that. It's sort of like going to a historic site. So when we went inside the Pendry, and we saw obviously the empty ballroom, and then you showed me where certain parts of the set were, it was akin to, kind of, for me, like going into a castle or something. It was like, wow, this is where this happened and that happened, even though obviously it doesn't look like it, other than the bit of the window.
Here's where they chopped the little boys' heads off. Oh, sorry, that's British history.
Yes.
Oh, sorry.
A lot of British history is chopping people's heads off, and I live not too far from where some of that happened, and there's even a pub that has a hangman's noose outside to celebrate such things. Lovely. So...
That's verboten here. We don't do that here.
No, oh my goodness. But it's so funny.
Was it like deja vu? Did you have a deja vu feeling too, because you'd seen these places, like when we went to Vaqueros or when we went to Fort McHenry, or is it just so different seeing it in person than watching it on the show?
For the Pendry building, especially when I arrived at night, yes, it was very familiar and deja vu-ish. When going, funny enough, the waterfront was the only one that was a bit of a disappointment, because it's changed so much.
Different inside.
If anything, Cooper's looks more like the waterfront did in the show than the waterfront does. And so
Cooper's hasn't changed inside too.
And when I went into Cooper's, I was trying, hang on, was this the bar they filmed in, but they just changed the name? I was all confused for the first day of like, hang on, because Cooper's does feel more like the waterfront. Because also the waterfront's a lot bigger than I imagined it being, because for some reason on screen it looks a bit smaller.
I think they bumped out some walls and stuff for sure. Because the area in the back with the pool table, I think, has been way expanded. And of course, when they cleaned it out and painted everything white and put in the ceiling fans, and it's very hard to recognize as sorry to say, but sort of a dark grungy bar we were shooting in. Yeah.
Now it's a kind of trendy bar, but the positives though, I really enjoyed that crab. What was it? It was sort of this weird. No, it was supposed to be a crab pate, wasn't it? And it was ended up
Crab
being
cake?
no. What was it? It was this sort of thing where you dip the bread into the crab. It was really nice. Do you remember?
Crab dip. Yeah, we
Crab
had
dip.
crab dip at the waterfront. Yeah.
We ordered something else and got that instead, but it was so good.
Right,
Honestly, it was so good.
That's right. What did we order? I can't even remember
what we ordered now. We ordered
and
something
halfway through it, we're like, wait a minute.
Yeah, this isn't
didn't
what we
order
ordered, but it was really good. So it was like, so if you want a really good crab experience, I definitely recommend the waterfront.
Yeah, that was good.
Oh dear, but yeah, so no, it's been awesome being a part of all this, really. And we've been told that the podcast inspired the reunion, which is amazing.
So many people said that
that's
we wouldn't
crazy.
be at the reunion if it hadn't been for
the
podcast. And I think it just really sort of it was, and thank God for Stephanie Fontana and Kathy and Greer who put it all together. And if anybody else I missed, but the podcast got everybody talking and thinking back, and it really sort of drew a circle around it, right? And then they just sort of tightened up that circle and got everybody. Well, not everybody, because it was difficult to get all 6,000 people that worked on the show into Cooper's.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was quite the experience. And I have to say to our listening audience that Chris was quite the star.
It's the first time in my life I felt like a celebrity.
The last
time, probably.
the night before, they had a get together at one of the bars, and I just went home because I was tapped out on 6 years of bar experience in Fells Point working on the show. But I don't remember if I was tired or what my problem was that day.
We'd been driving around. So.
Chris is immediately recognizable apparently now. His stature and his face and his voice is recognized all over the world now, because didn't you say the guy, where were you recently, and as one of our rabid Homicide fans from across the pond?
Yeah, it's hilarious. So I was at
collared Chris.
So funny. So I was an extra on my friend Alex Barrett's new feature film, and it's a film called The Date, because I actually didn't know the title of the film. I had to look this up because I wasn't sure.
The Date, DATE?
Yeah, The Date.
Okay.
So
you have to tell us when it comes out.
Yeah, and I was a background extra in a bar, and I was roped into playing pool, which I'm terrible at. I'm terrible at playing pool. I'm terrible at all ball games, actually. But anyway, that's a whole other probably podcast in itself. So I was waiting for a fellow extra to join me. His name was Matt. I didn't know who Matt was, but he was sort of tangentially connected to various circles of friends of mine. So I'd never met Matt. But so anyway, so Matt finally turns up, and like everybody's like, "Oh, Matt, this is Chris. Chris is Matt." So like, we're having a general kind of quick chat about, how do we, know Alex? What do we do? And when I mentioned podcasting, Matt stopped me and said, "Hang on a minute. You're not Chris Carr from Homicide Life on the set, are you?" And I was like, "Yes." And it like instantly, he's like, "Oh, I love that podcast," and so it was so funny.
Wow, that's cool.
And a whole new sort of friendship started from there, because it's so nice and quite sadly rare experience to meet somebody else who's actually seen Homicide, and then to be able to talk to them about it passionately. Is such a rare treat. And so Matt Murdock, who's also a filmmaker, who went to the same university I did, but was a couple of years ahead of me, he was inspired by Homicide, and he was very much inspired by the kind of character-driven nature of the show, and has gone off to direct sort of short films, and I think also art films, if I remember correctly, that have been very much influenced just by that approach to things. And he's been to Baltimore himself. He came twice, so he's got some really cool Baltimore stories. I won't ruin them. It'd be nice to maybe have Matt on and other fans in the future.
We want to have some super fans on at some point, for sure.
He did manage to come to Baltimore just as they, I think, wrapped the movie or season 7. So he did, and apparently there used to be a shop selling Homicide memorabilia briefly in Fells Point. and he
Really?
went there. He managed to sneak into the Pendry, and he actually got to. I think did he say he got to see the set? I can't remember now. But anyway, so he was a huge fan, and
Well,
he
he snuck into the Pendry before it was the Pendry.
yeah,
right?
exactly. Before it was the
It
Pendry,
was the rec
and
pier,
then he
right.
came back not long ago, but he missed the Homicide board in Coopers. So a lot of people miss this.
Oh.
So in Coopers, if you're going to go up the stairs, that's where you'll find the Homicide board.
The murder
the murder
board.
boards, and he's from season 6. So having a chat with Reed, next to the Homicide boards where I met Reed at the reunion, and we were trying to work out if they changed the board every season.
I was going to say, how is it from season 6?
Well,
I
yeah,
don't know
it's
this.
from season 6. So there's a question that needs to be answered somehow about whether they saved the board each season, or whether for some reason season 6 they saved that
Why
board.
it was different.
But that particular board was specifically from season 6. So it's like,
well, since I'm now re-binging, I'm just about more than halfway through season 6, so re-binging everything again. I'll see if I'll keep an eye out for that and see for whatever reason it looks different.
It's
in
interesting.
Season 7.
Yeah, so I don't know. Maybe they I don't know. Did they think they were going to get cancelled and they packed everything up and then had to rebuild it again? I don't know, because I think the squad room did get a redecoration in season 7.
Yeah,
didn't
maybe
it?
that was it. Yeah,
maybe that's what
I
it is.
keep waiting as I'm watching season 6. I'm like, I guess the painting didn't happen until 7.
Yeah.
So after because it happens after
the shooting. Yeah.
Fallen Heroes 1 and 2
is the second one, and it's Junior Bunk, isn't it? Manages to get a police officer's gun. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was those 2 end season 6. So so season 7 is when it's dark blue, and so maybe that. Yes, I would agree. That's probably what happened. But I didn't. I don't know that I was. I was maybe cognizant of it at the time, but I'll keep my eye out as season 7 pops up this week to look for the difference in the board. Yeah, that's funny.
So if anybody's in Baltimore and you want to see some bit of Homicide history, definitely go to Cooper's and go up the stairs, because it's easy to miss, because most people just hang around the front bar of Cooper's and that'll be it.
That was a surprise to me, and I've certainly been there since I left the show.
Yeah.
And didn't know it was there.
And when I went to Cooper's, I was explaining to the bar staff what it meant, what it was, because they weren't sure. So I did my bit to explain it. And then obviously the next day, the cast and crew came in, and suddenly it became a very Homicide experience for all of them, because they were all in their 20s. They had no idea what the show was.
What is that? Yeah. And I have to go back and look again, not to toot my own horn, but because my name was on there. I was on the murder board.
Oh, do you want to tell you if it's still on there? Hang on.
I can't remember. No, it's not there then. And it was way back. I want to say maybe season 3 or 4 it was on the board.
All I remember the board is that Kellerman had 2 open cases. That's what I remember. Hang on a minute.
Yeah,
I've got the murder board here. Here we go.
Too, yeah.
So we've got Ballard, Bayless, Falsone, Garrity, Kellerman, Lewis, Munch, Pembleton. Yeah.
And if I remember, mine was under whoever the first on the left, whichever detective that was, my name was under.
Oh, okay, yeah.
But then I also forgot. I'm watching the episodes. It's when Kellerman is suspected. It's sort of the crossover between Kellerman being suspected in the graft from the fire department when he was a fire detective, and then it sort of overlaps with the Luther Mahoney shooting. But the lawyer that comes in is named Ingram, and I was like, and I totally forgot. There was also a character named after me.
That's really cool.
I'm just to assume it was named after me, because who else would it be named after?
Yeah, I'm not seeing you on the board. I'm looking at it now. I've even got a video of it. I'm not seeing it.
I have a picture of it. I have to see if the picture I have shows the top. Well, it's the picture that's on our About page. The picture on our About page. I don't know if it shows the top and what year it was.
Yeah, this one says 1998, and it's unfortunately it's a bit of an awkward angle to photograph. You never quite get a flat-on image of it. It's very hard. But anyway, maybe get a drone in there or something. But
they're everywhere.
There we go.
So I want to know.
Oh, hang on.
So this episode is going to be about me and Chris. Okay. Forget all these famous people we've been interviewing. Now it's about us. Although Chris,
apparently I am famous now.
Arguably, Chris is famous now.
In very small circles, but yes.
Right, tiny circles. So I want to know. So you said you weren't aware of the show until 94, and you were what? A
13,
toddler?
I was 13 years old. I was. Hang on, I've got notes, but no, I was 13 years old when Homicide. It was the summer of 1994. and I just moved into a new house with my mum,
Hmm.
and so Channel 4 was the broadcaster in the UK that showed Homicide, and I just remember that summer was just this constant trailer on a loop of like Munch saying Homicide, and then the trailer voiceover saying, "From Barry Levinson comes the award-winning #1 TV show in America," and I was like, and being a kid, and I don't know, I was besotted by kind of crime stuff and all that, and my friend John Singleton and I were like really excited about this show Homicide coming on, and I'm sad to say when I first watched it, it was a disappointment. But I was a 13-year-old boy expecting gunfights, etc., and something akin to Miami Vice, and it wasn't that at all. But as I got a little bit older, only 2 years later, I rewatched the show. And I suddenly really began to appreciate it. And
how did you rewatch it? Was it on reruns?
It was what it was. I think so. Basically, I think it's difficult to remember exactly how. I think I watched the first episode, and I probably didn't watch much more. And it became a bit of a curiosity that I'll just dip into once in a while. But it was about I was trying to work this out. I think it was about season 4, which was about 95, 96 in Britain, where something about it really caught me, and it just clicked, and I just started watching it kind of all the time from that point on, just following it every week, and it was on Saturdays, and then in 1998 they kind of, because Channel 4, so what I didn't realize at the time is, only when I looked into it again, that apparently Channel 4 were quite bad at showing it properly in order, whilst when I first
Really?
yeah, apparently. Huh. So apparently they would show a few seasons and then it would sort of stop. And then, but what I do remember is in 1998, they kind of re-showed the whole thing, 2 episodes at a time on a Saturday. So I kind of managed to revisit the whole thing over the sort of 1998, 1999 to 2000. And they stopped it at the end of season 6. So they never showed season 7 on Channel 4. And so I was left like, how's this show end?
That's so weird.
It was. I think just Channel 4 didn't want to buy season 7 because
it's like
they
that
wanted
book, the unofficial Homicide book, also ends on season 6.
Yeah, a lot of things sort of ended on season 6, and then season 7 kind of happened. And I don't know why. And I didn't watch season 7 until 2006 when I bought the DVD. And I was at university at that point. So I bought that and the movie and finally finished Homicide. And had that sort of sense of completion. But no, it just, so I think for me in particular, like when I was studying drama and media studies, when I was sort of, 16, 17, 18. So when I was in, sixth form college, which is senior high in America. So when I was at sixth form college, which is senior high in America, that's where, while studying film and learning a bit about drama and stuff and watching Homicide on Saturdays, something really clicked. And this show, I realized how special it was. And we learned about the French New Wave when I was doing media studies. And this sort of picture started to form that was more whole than my kind of adolescent view of Homicide. Why, well, there are enough gunfights sort of view. Whilst then I realized the action was actually it was the dialogue, it was the tragedy of it and stuff like that. And then also what also was interesting was how funny it was. It's a very funny show because of the kind of gallows humor. It wasn't funny at the sacrifice of drama, which a lot of shows do now. What drives me up the wall a little bit nowadays is what I think we call it irreverent dialogue, where there's a moment and then somebody has to say a quip to kind of remove the seriousness of the moment, and then we kind of come back.
It's all about irony now instead of just sort of like observational humor.
Yeah, and I'm really interested in sincerity, and we live in a world that's obsessed with irony, and it drives me up the wall. So Homicide is a very sincere show as far as I feel. Obviously, there are little moments of irony, but it's not the guiding force of it. Whilst a lot of television today is obsessed with irony. And I think irony makes people feel smart. That's the problem.
Yeah, and also irony is now define the definition of real irony is not what people call irony these days. Yeah, but yeah, I think I would agree. I think there's too much emphasis on cleverness. These are sort of clever little quips. Yeah, like you said.
Yeah, and I blame it squarely at Joss Whedon and Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and then Marvel, because that's what popularized that approach. In my opinion, I could be wrong, but I put aim at him.
There you go.
And then,
From the mouth of Chris Carr, the famous Chris Carr.
So, television historians, etc., feel free to disagree, but I think that's for me where it starts.
We're going to get so many emails about that. Like the emails we never
Oh,
get.
man. Yeah, it's true. Finally, we'll get
How many
emails.
emails did we get today? None.
So yeah, so no, it's so funny. So to me, Homicide really started in the summer of 1994, and that trailer, and weirdly, a lot of I
Hmm.
think also in the early days in the pre-internet world, um, movie trailers and like the publicity of films and TV was quite a big deal, and it went on for weeks. And so you build up this weird relationship with something because of the publicity you've seen, and then usually when you watch these things, they don't quite live up to the weird version you made up in your head of it. And so it was kind of like that, really. But I'm glad I stayed curious with it, because it became a massively important piece of viewing for me from the years 1996 to 2000. And it just sort of stayed with me. And the characters of of Pemberton and Bayliss, I think, if anything, I really love the debates between those two, because what made that show different from other cop shows is they were debating the nature of life and death. They were talking about like belief and disbelief. We're talking about all sorts of sort of weighty topics that a lot of TV just didn't talk about, and it was quite interesting. So that really stood out for me. So yeah, and then just the kind of vivid characters of Howard G, Lewis, Kellerman, and Munch. And then Dr. Cox, who I will admit had a bit of a teenage crush on.
Oh, there you go.
So,
Michelle, we're going to have you on.
you
He'll
know,
admit his crush later.
oh my goodness. So yeah, so no, honestly,
She was terrific,
She
yeah.
was. She's amazing, and she's great in everything she's in. I remember her in Battlestar Galactica. She's briefly in that, in a two-parter. She's so brilliant, and so yeah, it's such a great show. So no, that's
amazing. It's absolutely amazing troupe of actors in that show. I mean, rewatching it again for the who knows how many times.
Yes,
it really is, in many instances, still stunning to me how good the writing and acting is. Obviously, everything's not perfect.
No.
There's hits and misses, but on the whole, consistently. I mean, I sit there and have myself and say out loud to the TV, like, wow, like where did that come from? And it's interesting. You talk about the conversations between Tim Bales and Pemberton. I can only think of their real names, Kyle and Andre.
yes.
So much of which centered around God. Is there a God? Why isn't God here? Is God here? I don't believe in God anymore because of what I see every day. Those kind of things. And in rewatching season 6, there is a lot of God in season 6. Of course, there was earlier on with the murders of the women's bodies that were dumped in dumpsters
the white
near
glove
churches,
story,
the white glove murder. But now I just finished watching the ones where the priests were murdered, which was either a 2 or 3-parter.
Oh yeah.
And in addition to, which I think is when you're going to ask me that later, but in addition to Kaddish, which is one of my favorite episodes.
Oh yeah, I love that's one of my favorite too.
Which is Richard Belzer.
Yeah.
But there are parts in Kaddish, and also I think the Valentine's Day, which was right before Kaddish, where there are almost the Scorsese-esque cuts between the baby being baptized in the Catholic Church and the rabbi and saying Kaddish at it's not the wake, sitting Shiva in Kaddish, and the rabbi and the minyan, they have the men's prayer group and everything, and the cutting between the two, very sort of Scorsese-esque, and it sort of builds up the import sort of and how weighty these topics are for people in their lives. But also the juxtaposition of the different religions and the people interacting with them. And there seemed to be a lot more of that to me in the like last half of season 6. And who knows, I don't know why that is, maybe why I felt that way. Yeah, Kaddish.
Yeah, Kaddish is really good.
Beautiful episode, but also the cutting back to the past and everything. And I also, one of the things I realized, not to get off topic, first of all, that neighborhood in Pikesville was like 2 miles from my house. So that was like the best location we'd ever gone to because it was like right around the corner from me. But also the thing I don't think I ever realized later was the rabbi that's reading the prayers in the graveyard and then is also, when they're sitting Shiva at the house, is a rabbi that I came in contact with later when I worked at the Jewish Times.
Oh, cool.
It was Rabbi Wahlberg. I believe it was Rabbi Wahlberg who was actually in Homicide 30 years later, literally. I'm working at the Jewish Times, and Rabbi Wahlberg, who had been at Beth Tefillah synagogue here, which is 3 miles from my house, was at for 40 years. I think he was. The rabbi there is retiring, and so I do a story on. I talk to him about retiring and his 30 years there, and then I talk to the new rabbi who came in after him. And as I'm watching Homicide the other night, I'm like, oh my God, that's Rabbi Wahlberg. Like 30 years later, I have this very personal sort of interaction with him in a completely different place and time
Yeah,
and
yeah,
thing.
yeah.
Really, just really, and also the realization when we were talking to Isabella that I had worked with her on Real Men, and the things that popped up later and before that I didn't know that I had interactions with people from the show is just really kind of odd. But Kaddish is, beautiful,
Yeah, it's such a great episode,
beautiful
that one.
episode.
And fun enough, yeah, I vaguely remember watching that when it first sort of came out over here as well, because I was, I would have been a teenager in that, because it's Teenage Munch, isn't it? So it's like suddenly it became quite relatable. It's no, it's a really moving episode. Yeah, that's a really cool one. The other weird memory I have of Homicide is a bizarre one, but because you mentioned about first impressions, I think, of the show and your questions you sent to me, and I don't know why, but the one weirdly relatable thing with Homicide for me was the weather. Like, because the show was starting the summer and ending kind of
The weather.
spring. And so it kind of, usually I think Homicide came out around September time, if I remember correctly. It was starting September and ending around probably March or something. And so the show kind of matched the weather I was experiencing in England. And a lot of it's
Interesting.
predominantly grey as well, which England, and right now it is grey. Generally, England's 80% grey most of the time. So it's strangely, because I always remember the early episodes of each season, it was really hot and sweaty.
Yeah, because I think we started in July or August.
And then you kind of end up in winter coats and stuff, and that totally kind of, felt very relatable. Because I remember when it came out that summer, it was a very hot summer of 1994. And yeah, just that opening impression of that first episode, everybody's really hot and stuff. So yeah, it's quite funny, that.
Yeah, and it's funny. And hats off to Jay Tobias, one of the assistant directors, who has sent us some footage from behind the scenes of the show. He had somebody shooting video a couple times. And I was watching the one he sent us yesterday, which was behind the scenes when we were shooting Requiem for Adina.
Yeah, it's such a great episode.
The whole crew is breaking into a row house downtown. And everybody is, I'm in like this gigantic parka. And we all have like this gigantic, we used to stand around and say, where'd you get that parka? Are those boots warm? Because we would be outside 12 hours when it was 10 degrees, 15 degrees, whatever. But so we're shooting that scene and the video and I can't remember who took the video, but the video, in the middle of shooting, it starts snowing, right?
Yeah.
So we started the scene, it wasn't snowing, and then it's snowing. So it just sort of, we shot in what, and then I also watched the episode the other night, which I also don't think I worked on. I think I was gone at that point, working on Pecker. That sounds terrible. Working on a John Waters film called Pecker.
Not the porn film.
The one with Steve Allen and his wife, where the guy falls off the roof and he shoots him through the window. And there's a scene with it, not just drizzle, standing outside trying to figure out where the guy came from, how he fell off the roof. Driving rain. It completely soaked the actors. Driving. It wasn't like, okay, stop, let's get an umbrella, let's put a thing up, let's stand under, the canopy, let's get them out of the rain. It's like, no, just keep shooting. They're getting soaked, driving rain. So yeah, lots of weather. That's so funny. Lots of weather in the show.
It's bizarre.
It's so true.
But it's just weird things you pick up on. I was just like, that made it very relatable.
And I don't think we ever faked like we were shooting. I don't think, and somebody can email me and correct me, I don't think we ever faked like we had to pretend it was winter when it was summer. I don't think we did have snow. We made snow. Josh corrected me on that. We did make snow in one episode, which was, I think, not in the winter. But generally it was whatever. In the script, it was the same time of year generally that we were shooting at and that was supposed to be in the story. So okay, so before we get to me, so we'll stick on the famous Chris. So how did you go from So you were studying media and film in school, and so tell us a little bit about that path. So what did you end up doing in film? What do what do you do now? And then the developing the cop show idea that brought you to emailing me and thinking about the style of Homicide. So
Yeah.
what was your how did you get to what you're doing today, and talk a little bit about what you do today?
Yeah, yeah. Well, so starting at the beginning. So, I've always just had this lifelong fascination with movies, and I think getting a little bit personal. So when my parents divorced, I think one of the things that for me was a sanctuary was watching movies and TV. And if anything, the movies that really caught me early on were the Star Trek movies. Star Trek two,
Oh,
three,
yeah, of
four, and
course.
five.
The
I
Wrath of Khan,
Yeah, and I was a total
best one.
obsessive, and I had this video box set back then, a VHS, that I probably went. What I don't know. I repeatedly watched a lot of the same stuff constantly, but I took comfort in it. It was something comforting about
I
being
do
with
the same
Captain
thing.
Kirk
I
and
watched
stuff.
yes.
And so as you get a bit older, and you realize that you can make movies and stuff. It's all very exciting. And so really, sadly, the way the education system, I never really got to actually, and my family weren't a particularly artistic family, so I didn't really ever get to hold an actual camera until I was 17 years old.
Hmm.
And so that was at sixth form college, which is senior high in the States. And so what I could do there was rent cameras out over weekends and film stuff. So when you first get a camera, you just film everything. So I remember once I filmed just cars going down the road, right? And I caused a massive traffic jam because people thought I was a police speed trap, which for a few weeks was quite fun to do. But
And were you shooting on film or
no,
video?
no,
What
no.
and
This is on VHS. So this is actually
VHS?
shooting
Okay,
on VHS. So my earliest stuff. So
sure.
yeah, we shot everything on VHS, and then I moved to mini DV. So my first projects were on VHS with these big shoulder-mounted cameras by Panasonic. And so through media studies, we were given specific tasks to do. And so one of them, fun enough, was to make a film trailer for a police movie, because we were studying the crime genre and we were studying film noir. And so we were told, right, you got a choice of doing a trailer for a police drama or something. I can't remember what the other one was. And for me, like, police drama, oh, brilliant, this is it. Had guns and everything. So it was always sort of really fast paced cutting, and this. And I also wanted to be an actor at one point, so I'm in it. My friend, a good friend of mine who's sadly no longer with us, a good friend of mine called Oliver Ince, he and I just would constantly filming random components for these various media studies projects, and then eventually we would bring all this stuff together in the editing bay,
Nice.
on early computer editing on something called VM Studio, and just put these things together, and then I'd be like, oh, that didn't work, I'm gonna go out and film it again. So the Inner Kubrick came out, and suddenly we're filming repeats of the same thing but slightly differently. Or I recast something, and all sorts of random stuff, and this sort of mini epic was going on in the background. Every other week I was filming in some high-rise car
I wanna
park
see it.
somewhere.
I wanna see
Well,
them.
it's
I
on
wanna see them.
YouTube. It's
Oh,
hilarious. It
you're
was
kidding,
No,
really?
seriously, it's called No Respect for the Law. It was hilarious. And and on top of that, I combined footage from movies and things, because obviously I couldn't blow up a car, but I wanted one to blow up in it. I wanted a helicopter, didn't have one, so I just nicked it from a film. Luckily, the funny thing is, when you nick stuff from films that are on VHS, the quality sort of starts to match a little bit. So it's
Right,
like,
right.
it
Yeah,
was quite
sure.
funny. And if you degrade
Yeah.
it enough as well, it starts to match a bit more. But I mean, obviously, it was never convincing that we did that stuff, but it kind of sort of fit. And so I had a lot of fun with this thing. And you're trying out different things, you're learning about screen direction, you're learning about match cutting, etc. And it just became this mini epic, really. And it ended up just being this like 2-minute little video. But that's sort of what we did. And it was so much fun.
So at that point,
Yeah.
was any of your shooting emulating any of the Homicide style? If
Not
you had
not at
started
that
watching that when
point.
you were younger?
No, I was mindful of it, but no, and I
Like,
think.
were jump cuts were acceptable?
Well, my first ever short film has a very specific Homicide 3, the 3 cut thing, where it's the
Yeah,
same thing 3 times. So I did this, my first ever narrative short film is this very pretentious film called Prologue. that's sort of about a guy who's stuck in an office job, wanting to
So
be an
pretentious.
artist, etc. So very much mirroring my life at that time. And there's this one moment where this guy's endless, because I used to keep constantly writing ideas down and notes. So one of my characteristics in my 20s was constantly writing random things down. And so the character in the film is like writing lots of notes. He rips his paper out, throws his pen down, and I wanted to show how exhausted and exasperated he was. So the jump cut thing made a lot of sense to me, and it was boom boom, and we timed it with the music as well. And it's shot in a very Homicide way. Actually, there's a lot of Homicide-y moments where we're handheld, swapping from one character to another, and it was very French New Wavy and all that, and had a lot of fun with it. But obviously the film wasn't great. It had problems like sound problems, which is always a thing that plagues early films, and stuff. And then I was also going through my phase of not using actors who trained in acting. I was to use real people. I think a lot of filmmakers go for this, I want real people, and then you realize
they'll be fine.
And then you realize real people are not
They're so
great.
bad.
And you realize why people study acting.
I was in one of my friends' films at UMBC, and it was like, we're recasting your part.
It's heartbreaking, isn't it? It's like, but
I was so wooden, you know, it was just so bad. And they got an actor, which made total sense. I mean, they got somebody that was in the acting program, and she was great.
Yeah,
but fun.
So that kind of stuff. So those are some very early days, and then I went to university. I was very lucky at university. We had like master classes with Jack Cardiff. So Jack Cardiff, the famous cinematographer,
my gosh, Jack Cardiff.
Matter of Life and Death.
People, if you don't know Jack Cardiff, look Jack Cardiff up. He is my favorite Technicolor British cinematographer. He is and his films have a Jack Cardiff look.
Yeah.
If a film comes up, I'll go, oh my God, that's Jack Cardiff. Like, you can tell from the I don't know his black and white stuff if he did black and white, but the color
he did do a little bit,
very much has a signature look.
Well, he was the pioneer with Technicolor and stuff. So I had this
just beautiful.
And I have this lovely memory of sitting next to him in the cinema whilst we're screening a clip from A Matter of Life and Death. And it was just so nice to be next to him, watching that was his first film as director of photography officially. So be able to sit next to him whilst he's rewatching this thing and then giving this masterclass. And then I was asked to interview him. So there's this tape somewhere in Italy of me interviewing Jack Cardiff that I've never seen again. So the guy who filmed it was a guy called Danilo from my class, who's Italian, who then after uni disappeared back to Italy.
Danilo, we need that film.
And I was the other thing as well. I wasn't very well when I was filming this interview, and I was worried that I'd given Jack Cardiff a cold. So for like 2 weeks after doing this interview with him,
I killed Jack Cardiff.
Constantly looking out to see if I'd accidentally killed the poor man. But no, thank God I hadn't. And we learned. So funny enough as well. One of the other things about Jack Cardiff, he talked a lot about obviously studying paintings, looking at the nature of light and shadow and the quality of light in different places. In his book, he talks a bit about when he used to go on holiday, and he's right. You know, when you go to different countries, the quality of the light changes slightly. And like, I remember when I was in South Korea in the winter of 2002, that there's a slightly kind of weird warmish quality to the light, which gives almost a slightly brown effect. It was really weird, and I remember noting that. And then in other places you go to, like in England, you get a lot of soft light. In France, you get a lot of soft light. And fun enough, the soft light
has got its own thing going on.
And that's what influenced the lighting of the French New Wave movies and stuff. And so you just sort of learn all these things. And he encouraged us all to buy light meters and things and study the light in that way. And so I have this light meter that I occasionally break out to see what's going on with the light and stuff. And it was just fantastic. And we would do exercises about like, if I remember correctly, now this might be the Billy Williams exercise. So Billy Williams, who was the DOP on the film Gandhi and lots of other amazing films of Richard Attenborough, we used to do these exercises about lighting a scene where somebody comes into a dark room with a lit birthday cake. So it's all lit by candlelight. And stuff like that, and that was very interesting. So these were really great things. And see, the University of Creative Arts in Farnham, which is where I studied film, we would shoot on 16mm.
Say that
film.
again.
So the University of Creative Arts in Farnham, in Surrey. Farnham. And so it was at the time when I went there, it was called the Surrey Institute of Art and Design. It then changed its name to the University College of Creative Arts, but somebody somewhere thought it'd be funny to call it the Farnham University College of the Creative Arts. Now, what does that spell out? So somebody made up some T-shirts saying I graduated from, without saying it. But no, its official title these days is University of Creative Arts, and it's in Farnham because they've also have a branch in Epsom and somewhere else. And it had this wonderful film department, and I studied cinematography there because that was the strongest department. It was run by this lady called Nosky DeVille, and she was fantastic. And so we would shoot on film, we'd shoot on mini DV, which was the video format in those days. We also shot on Betacam and Digibeta, and then we were encouraged to build relationships with like the various sort of camera companies. So we did day trips to Arri and Panavision and stuff.
Nice.
And I shot with an Eclair 16mm camera because we had Arri SR2s as our main camera, but they were always a nightmare to book. So I would book out the Eclair to try out different things. And I also had my own Super 8 camera, so I did all sorts of. I was really into time lapse in those days. So I was filming lots of sunsets and stuff, and got time lapse down to a kind of fine art by the time I finished. And then I've not used it since, sadly. But I loved doing time-lapse sunsets. It was a bit like going fishing or something. It was just kind of fun. Just to hang out with a few friends, cameras ticking away, and you're just chatting about...
You don't have to do anything.
No, you're just talking about life or whatever, and while the camera's ticking away, and then you go and process the film, and then you realise, oh, shit, I got the mathematics wrong. It's gone too fast. So you'd have to do it again, It's quite funny.
Or you got the exposure wrong.
Yeah, or the exposure.
Clicking off one frame at a time.
Yeah. So that was all fun. And then so from university, I then for a while did do some I did do cinematography on low budget music videos, but I didn't enjoy that so much because in those days, in 2006, everybody was shooting everything on mini DV. So I'd gone from film to mini DV, and it was a massive letdown. Because mini DV was very difficult to light because it was very easy to overlight it. And with tight budgets and things, it was just always very hard to kind of. I used to take digital stills as well, so I had my first ever DSLR camera, which I bought in when I graduated in 2006. I bought this camera off eBay because I really wanted to kind of master stills photography as well. And I always used to find when I DP'd a lot of low budget music videos, I'd be really happy with the stills I took, but the video I think always looked crap.
So what, the mini DVs were just not as forgiving?
No, they had zero, like like
their latitude.
Yeah,
no
they
latitude?
had zero latitude. It was like it was horrid. So it was a horrendous format to film on. Whilst film, I like a lot of things. I knew by the time I finished on film, I knew my style. I used to like overexposing the film by a stop, so you get a bit more information in the shadows and then bring it back. And it made everything look really nice. And I even once got a compliment from a lab about my negatives. They look really good, apparently. And I was really pleased by this. So I kind of got this weird little thing that I was doing. But my big hang up, and this is probably because I have dyslexia, I had a real hang up about where to put lights and how to light movement. So I think in the end I probably should have been a stills photographer. Because
I light movement, that could be a problem. Right?
I'm like, taking a still image is significantly easier for me
for
than it is
movies
taking a moving.
and not
I know. So it's like, so there we go. And the other lesson I learned in life is I'm always better at telling people what to do than actually doing it myself. And
there you go. So you're a director.
Great at barbecues, you should do this, this, and this. If I do it myself, no, I'm going to burn it. I get the experts in, but then tell them how to do it. So all of these things I would do, like I would learn about cinematography, I'd learn about editing, I'd learn about sound. So at uni, I did a lot of jumping around departments, only because I wanted to kind of get an idea of each department and kind of what they needed from you as a director, because my goal always was to be a director, and I wanted, and I'd learned from a lot of bad directors that communication is very important on film sets, and a lot of people, if you get the communication wrong, it can cause all sorts of problems. And so I was really like just wanting to be a better communicator all around, and be able to talk everybody's different language, like talk to the sound guy and be there for his or her needs. Same for the cinematographer, give them the information they need, etc. Just so then it makes it all a bit more harmonious and a bit easier for everybody. Because I've been on set. One thing I've noticed on the film sets that I've been on is mutiny always starts at the back because information doesn't filter all the way back to the back of the set. So there's a lot of people with very experienced people who have no idea what's going on down there, but they're like, well, God, this is taking forever, and God, I could have shot 3 of these by now, and blah, blah, blah. And it kind of starts from there. And on low budget films, mutinies are a problem because with low budget films, because not everybody's being paid properly, or sometimes they're not even being paid at all, it's people's goodwill that keeps them on the film set. And if people are not motivated to come back, you do find situations where people just stop coming. And I've been in a few films where I got promoted where people kept leaving and I kept going up the ladder because things like that.
Oh, no.
And funnily enough, the first ever quote unquote proper film I worked on was a film called Proctor, and it was directed by a really famous director now who was at the National Film School called Joachim Trier. So Joachim Trier got nominated for an Oscar a few years back for a film called The Worst Person in the World. Really great Norwegian director, and I was on his graduation film. And the problem he had on there, he and his DP were both Norwegian, so a lot of the time they would just chat to each other in Norwegian, which meant then a lot of the rest of the crew had no idea what the hell's going on. And as always, you know, when you're learning your craft and stuff, sometimes you do spend a bit too long on shots that, when you think about it, actually probably shouldn't have spent 4 hours lighting a letterbox when we should have spent 4 hours filming dialogue or something. But in those days, you know, when you're a film student, you're kind of trying out all these things and stuff. And so, yeah, people would get annoyed and leave and stuff. So I went from being like the most junior production assistant to, God, I it's almost a third AD by the end of it. So it was quite funny.
Yeah, I mean,
You know?
I think even on obviously even on sets where you're getting paid, if the crew builds resentment because there's either people at the top, either in production, but you know, if the director on the set is not either prepared, or often if they come in latitudinally and haven't been in a crew before, maybe hadn't worked their way up, and come in sideways as a director and don't understand, you know, when you say, you know, we're going to shoot at night and I need the whole street lit. If you don't know what that takes to do that, and have expectations, or to change that in the middle of the stream and don't understand what the crew has to do, definitely it builds resentments all the way down the line, and you will have an angry, slow crew if you don't either know what you're doing, or if you may know what you're doing, but you may not communicate well to the crew. You know, even, and I hate to say this in an empathetic way, but in a way that, you know, everybody needs to work together, because there's 100 people there doing 50 different jobs, right? So, yeah, I would say it happens on sets where you get paid too, not just sets where you're working for free.
Yeah, and I think it's an important skill as a director to try and, you know, to get the crew on board with you and get everybody on your side, because as a director, everything's kind of against you the second you turn up on a set. Time's against you, lights against you. I don't know, there's all sorts of things, the budget, because the big thing between film and theatre is the logistics. Filmmaking is a logistical challenge and an artistic endeavour, whilst in a theatre it is an artistic endeavour that's in an enclosed space, so, you know, significantly different. And, you know, you're in the real world, and at times where I have to remind crew, because you could get this weird mindset sometimes, so I produced a few things too. So I filmed on this very dodgy estate, so I'm jumping ahead of a story now, but there was this film called Victims that I produced with Hattie Morahan and Brianna Corrigan. And Brianna Corrigan's famous for being the lead singer of a band called the Beautiful South. And we filmed this for a scheme with Film London. So they financed the film, and also we were with the Hammersmith Council. So they provided certain empty buildings for us. So there was some sort of estate that one of the towers was to be demolished, but they were waiting for people to move out of it. So we had access to all sorts of flats in this building, and all sorts of shenanigans would happen. So like first day of filming, I realized suddenly somebody was still living in the flat that we'd been given. I had this weird sense of somebody's been in this room. I just had this feeling, and I can't quite pinpoint exactly why I had that feeling. But the first day of filming, I obviously, being the producer, and the whole thing on my shoulders in terms of the logistics, I turned up like 2 hours before anybody else was due to unlock the flat and go in. And I discovered this family who didn't speak English. I realized quite quickly they were Polish, and our director of photography was Polish. So I called up our director of photography and explained the situation, and suddenly it became the UN and this sort of weird sort of thing where we had to try and find them somewhere else to go because we were supposed to be filming in this place, and unfortunately we would have to tell the council, and also it meant we couldn't store any equipment in this flat because people who we didn't know who they were living in this flat, which was supposed to be empty. So it's stuff like that, and so that already, you know, first day of filming always takes the longest, and when you've already got this situation where there's a family living in the flat that you've been given by the council that you're supposed to be filming in, but there's a family living in there, and now you've got to find a very, very humanitarian way to get rid of them so you can start filming, but at the same time make sure they go somewhere that's safe and secure for them. That's the kind of stuff you have to deal with sometimes. And on a low budget film, we've got like zero resources. So it's a lot of charm and whatever to try and kind of fandangle things together.
Right.
And
Yeah,
thank God that
especially
happened.
low budget.
Yeah.
Oh
and then a few days later, we were filming on apparently one of the dodgiest estates in London, which is the Clem Attlee Estate. People could tell me if that's dodgy or not. And a few things happened. So the first funny story was we were filming a guy getting beaten up, and then these kids and their bikes goes, "You're not doing it right. You're not doing it right. You know, this is how you're supposed to do it." Then some other kid that came up to me a bit later said, "The guns come out at 7," implying that we need to leave by 7.
Wow.
And then I'd given a speech earlier in the day to remind the crew that we're filming in a quote unquote hostile environment, so you must not leave anything unattended, especially expensive lenses, laptops, etc. I also created a buddy system, and lo and behold, our editor on this film, for whatever reason, decided to leave his laptop in the middle of the car park of the estate and walk away from it. Now, in real life, what scenario would you leave your expensive laptop in the middle of a car park in a place you don't know and walk off? I don't think anybody would do that. So why on earth do people do this on film sets? But they do, because there's this weird sense on a film set and we had no security or anything.
That's an enclosed environment, right?
And within 30 seconds, somebody clocked the laptop. Luckily, I clocked it before they did and got it.
Wow.
and saved his laptop. And then had a go at the editor and said, "Why on earth did you do that?" And you completely disregarded what I told you. So stuff like that happens all the time on film sets. And then we had a police helicopter swoop through towards the end, chasing someone. And it was a wonderful day. And unfortunately, none of that stuff could end up in the film. But
I'm just going to interject for American audiences that don't watch British television. An estate is not what an estate is here. What
is the estate
in England or London is a housing project.
Yes.
It's not. And here an estate is like a McMansion and a big fancy like
got you. Yeah,
6
we weren't
acres
filming
of
on
ground
Downton Abbey,
and a movie star living in it. Yeah. So an estate is a housing project.
As they would say, this ain't Downton Abbey, love.
Right, exactly.
That's where we were. So
the guns come out at 7. Wow.
The guns come out at 7. Yeah. So that was my fun on that film. And then beyond producing independent stuff on the side, I've done a lot of kind of corporate films. I worked for 3 years for a company called WDF Productions. One of the cool things there, I learned a lot about production management and sort of building crews and things. And we did a lot of cool arts documentaries. So we did profiles on filmmakers. So there's a British filmmaker called Alan Clark, who directed a lot of BBC dramas like Made in Britain, Scum. He launched like Ray Winstone. He launched Gary Oldman, people like that. And he was a very highly regarded director who died too young. I think he was only in his 50s when he died. He died of a heart attack. And he was very much, he was just very much in a particular niche in the British system and a bit of a purist. So I think he did get some approaches from Hollywood, but he just didn't want to work with movie stars. He wants to work with kind of gritty unknown actors, which sadly only gets you so far with movies, really. And also on top of that, he had a hostile BBC because he was always pushing the limits with things. His stuff was very hard hitting, and it's the sort of thing that would upset middle class people, so the various controllers at the BBC got annoyed with him and would so we did a really great profile on him and interviewed people like Ray Winstone. We interviewed like Paul Greengrass, who was inspired by Alan Clark. One of my favorite people was a investigative journalist called David Yallop, who wrote this really good book about hunting down Carlos the Jackal. So I had a great time chatting with him. And David Yallop told me all sorts of stories about how people tried to assassinate him and things. It was I had a really great day with David Yallop. And this particular documentary is now on the BFI box set that goes with the BFI Alan Clark box set. So you can, what they've done is they
nice.
divided the film up into sections that are relevant to the movie you're watching. But I also shot quite a few of those interviews as well, because so my cinematography training's been quite handy in the sense of that I can sometimes come in as a camera operator, and that sort of, in the low budget things, I've dipped in as a cameraman from time to time. I do a lot less of that now, but I have done that in the past. And so that was really handy. And then we also did a really cool thing for Sky Arts, which is one of the TV channels here, about a British filmmaker called Chris Pettit, who wrote a film called Radio On. It's a bit of a cult classic, and it had Sting in it. And we went and filmed him at various sort of locations around London that he had used. So that was really great. And then we also did some stuff for the Criterion Collection about Carol Reed, and sort of filmed interviews with academics and things.
Carol Reed.
So one of the fun ones, we went to this place, I can't remember what it is now, but there's this place where in outside of London where they have all these old trains, so different eras of old trains, you can rent them out. And we rented out an old train carriage that was sort of a 1930s train carriage, and it was all about a film called Night Train to Munich. So we were filming these two academics talking about Night Train to Munich on an old train carriage, and it was great fun. It was so much fun doing that. And then one other cool highlight was a music video for Thomas Dolby. So who's now a lecturer at Baltimore, John Hopkins. Thomas Dolby now teaches at Thomas Hopkins, but back then he was an 80s sort of star. And also he's the man, he made his fortune.
Is he at Hopkins or is he at UMBC?
No, he's at Hopkins. Yeah.
Is it Hopkins?
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
So there's some other famous sound guy that's at the school I went to.
Okay, yeah. So Thomas Dolby actually, despite being a very successful 80s musician, actually made a lot of his sort of fortune in the 1990s creating the technology behind polyphonic phone ringtones. So all the ringtone technology on old Nokia phones, Thomas Dolby created that. I don't know how he did it, but he did that. And so he disappeared from music in the 90s and the early 2000s, just being a kind of technology person. But in 2010, a good friend of mine, Paul Maverick, was directing this music video, and he needed some help just sort of sorting out the logistics, and also a B camera operator. So he and I shot this music video called The Toad Lickers. It's all about what happens to people when they lick psychedelic toads. And it's hilarious. And it got nominated for a Webby Award, and it was on like the BBC News and things. It was great fun. And we've got like parkourists dressed as Prince Charles. We've got like Muppets in it. So I've forgotten his name now, but one of the lead puppeteers behind the Muppets did all the Muppet stuff for us.
Wow.
And that was so cool. So there was a lot of stuff like, Compton.
Not Jim Henson.
Not Jim Henson himself, but he worked for Jim Henson. He's the guy who worked for Jim Henson.
Jim Henson's from Maryland.
Yeah, well, this guy trained under him and worked on the Muppets. Mike Quinn. So Mike Quinn was one of the puppeteers in the Muppets, and he was like, he famously had to hand up various puppets and made them come to life. Right. And that's what he did for us in this music video. And so he filmed all that in Arizona. We filmed in the UK. And one of the most amusing things from that shoot, we had to film some pickup shots of somebody looking at Jaffa cakes in their hand, and on these Jaffa cakes are written like "Eat Me" and Tipex or something. So, and weirdly, for some reason, we ended up filming outside the Shell building in Waterloo, and this security guard comes storming over, like, "Why are you filming out here?" And we said to him, "Oh, we're just filming a man holding Jaffa cakes in his hand." It sounded so ridiculous, right? This security guy was like, "What the hell are these guys on?" And then we showed him the footage, and he realized quite quickly that we were being totally straight with him. And he just said, "Oh, very professional," and then walked off. And so we carried on filming Jaffa cakes outside this building.
And a Jaffa cake is like a chocolate covered donut sort of thing?
Well, it's a chocolate biscuit with marmalade in it. I don't eat them because I'm allergic to oranges, but it's got marmalade in it.
A biscuit here is a cookie.
Yeah, so a cookie with chocolate. So a chocolate cookie with orange jam in it, or orange jelly. Sorry, orange jelly in it, and it was the funniest thing ever. So some of the random stuff I've done, and then obviously all of that aside, so obviously I've always been like, how's this link into directing and stuff? And so for me, over the years, whilst doing all these other paid jobs from corporate things, whatever, I'm also developing my own content because sadly, in outside of the studio system as a director, you've got to kind of prove that you could direct. It's like I was like saying somebody the other day, it's like trying to be a lawyer, but you have to kind of have a few successful cases under your belt before somebody will trust you to be a lawyer.
Right.
So as a director, you always have to constantly be proving yourself so that people can see a sure thing, so then they can hire you and you sort of go in, and because there's a lot of responsibility of directing, so I get it. And so you have to make short films that showcase what you do. And so one of these short films I made was called The Dry Cleaner, which I wrote and directed.
Yes, everybody go see that on YouTube. It's terrific.
Actually, it's on Amazon. Is it Amazon and Apple? Amazon and Apple is where you get it.
Amazon
you can see the trailer on YouTube, but Amazon, the award-winning trailer. But
go rent it
on Amazon. You can, you could. Well, I think can you rent it? You might. It's only $1.99, but you can get it on Amazon and Apple. And it was my first sort of foray into trying to do the kind of movies I wanted to make. So I want to make, my goal has always been to make kind of realistic feeling thrillers. Those are the films of the 90s and 2000s I really like the works of Michael Mann and people like, Homicide, they have this sort of authenticity to them without being boring, but there's something about it that's quite grounded. But then that gives you license to kind of, be sort of profound with it if you wish, etc. And so The Dry Cleaner was my first attempt at original spy fiction. And it's a contemporary spy film set about a British intelligence officer named George who recruits a Middle Eastern student named Lydia. And Lydia might have some insight on this revolutionary group that may or may not have ties to terrorism. So it's a war on terror story, and it kind of tries its best to sort of navigate some of the moral complexity of both a British intelligence officer having to recruit a student and also the difficulties of investigating terrorism. And because I did a lot of
it touches on that the ethical nature of recruiting a student,
exactly,
to tattle on her own people.
Yeah,
right.
And then how she feels about that, etc. And it was just, it was trying to find the human story within this sort of very big geopolitical thing. Because my other passion alongside cinema, I've got a few passions, but my other big passion in life is espionage. I've always been fascinated by geopolitics and espionage. And so alongside all of the film stuff I've been making, I've been sort of researching about spies and things. And I once met a real spy. The first ever spy I ever met was a KGB man who defected to the West called Oleg Gordievsky. And Oleg Gordievsky might well have saved us from World War III in the 1980s, in 1983. And eventually he got found out. So he was a Russian who ended up working for the British because he didn't like the Russian system. So he was a double agent run by MI6. And eventually he got betrayed by an American traitor, and it's believed to be Aldrich Ames is the man who betrayed him.
Oh,
and he was a CIA officer who then started selling secrets to the Russians for money to pay for his very expensive lifestyle. He is believed to be the man who exposed Oleg. There is some debate whether there might have been somebody else as well, but anyway. And so Oleg had to be smuggled out of Russia, and he got smuggled out of Russia in the boot of a car, very glamorous. And it was a very life and death situation, and he was very lucky to get out alive, to be honest with you. And anyway, he ended up in my hometown. And I recognized him. He was a customer of mine at a supermarket I was working at. I used to sell, I used to have a part-time job working at my local supermarket on the meat and fish counter, which is the most gruesome job you can get. But I learned a lot about filleting fish and stuff. And so I used to sell Oleg Gordievsky salmon, And so I asked him one day if he was, excuse me, sir, are you Oleg Gordievsky, the former KGB agent? He's like, yes, I am,
Wow, don't talk to me.
And then eventually recommended I read his book, which is what most good spies do now. And his book changed my perception of how espionage works.
And what's his book called?
Next Stop Execution by Oleg Gordievsky, and it's really good. But there's also a newer book called The Spy and the Traitor that provides extra insight into what happened, and that's by Ben McIntyre. And but Oleg's book just changed everything for me about how spying works, and I realized it is a very people-driven profession. It's not about blowing stuff up. It's not about James Bond sneaking into things, going undercover. It's about getting a British intelligence officer to find someone in, should we say, the target country who may give you secrets from that target country. and that person becomes the agent, and it's that person who's in danger. The British intelligence officer, probably just the worst that happens to them is they'll get expelled from the country. But the person who they're running, the agent's the person in danger. So in my film, the agent's obviously Lydia. She's the one who's this student who has these ties, this revolutionary group. And I've always just been fascinated by this bond between the intelligence officer, the handler, and their agent, because there's something really sacred there, because you're in this world of mistrust, but between those two people, they have to completely trust each other. And I've always found that really fascinating. I feel like that's a real lot of scope for interesting drama. And I have to tell you now, a lot of spy fiction's a real disappointment. Most spy films are just about blowing stuff up or a subgenre of action. There's very few spy films that are actually reflect the reality of it. Actually, in fact, one of the best spy shows I've ever seen is a French show called Le Bureau. Le Bureau is one of the most authentic shows about spying. Obviously, it's dressed up a bit.
Isn't that the one that's been remade
It
in
has.
English?
It's been remade by Paramount
With Richard
Plus.
Gere.
That's it. It's
right?
called The Agency. Yeah, and I've only seen a few episodes of The Agency. So The Agency is very good, but it's not. There's something missing about it, and I think maybe because of the cultural factor. I haven't seen enough of The Agency yet to see if they start making silly mistakes. But The Bureau is based on interviews with former French intelligence officers, and they kind of made up a lot of stories inspired by those interviews. So there's a lot of authenticity there.
What films would you recommend that are good?
Well, I think The Courier with Benedict Cumberbatch is really good. That's all about the Oleg Penkovsky affair, which is a different Oleg. And The Courier is all about a British businessman who gets recruited by MI6 to contact Oleg Penkovsky, who's basically MI6's man in Russia, who is sort of helping provide information about the Cuban Missile Crisis. And Oleg Penkovsky, sadly, comes to a very bad end. He gets found out, his treachery gets found out by the Russians, and he gets executed. And there's debate about how he was executed. Some people believe he was burnt alive. I've never personally seen enough to convince me he was. Usually, a Russian traitor usually just gets shot in the back of the head. But apparently, Oleg Penkovsky got burnt alive. I don't know if that's true, but a lot of people I respect tell me that is the case. And then there's some people out there I respect who tell me that's not the case. So I have no idea. But he did die. And Benedict Cumberbatch plays a guy called Greville Wynne, who is the British businessman who MI6 kind of used as a go-between between Oleg Penkovsky and MI6. So that's a really good film.
I was going to say, so how old were you when you met Oleg at the fish counter, and between then and when you started your Secrets and Spies podcast?
Oh, yeah. So I was 17 years old, but I met Oleg. So long time ago. Yeah. So this has been, my other passion next to Homicide.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and what an honor to meet one of the world's most effective spies as your first spy you've met. I've met a few spies now, but to be my first.
Amazing.
Because I'd love to do a film about Oleg Gordievsky, but I suspect that because of Ben McIntyre's book, somebody will beat me to it now. But who knows? Maybe somebody's listening there and it might all come together. But if you ever do need somebody, because one of the things in Oleg's book is dry cleaning. So dry cleaning is this technique used by spies. Before you go and meet your source, you need to make sure you're clean of surveillance. And so what you have to do is set up you give yourself a lot of time. So before you go and meet your source, you allow yourself 3 to 5 hours to do this technique of dry cleaning. And it's got to look like you're not doing anything. So what you do effectively is you pretend you're going shopping, or you pretend you're going to go and meet somebody else for a bit, and so on and so on. You do lots of very innocent looking activities, but what you do is you study those around you, and you're always questioning, is there a familiar face that keeps popping up? And if there is, you abort the meeting. And that's what dry cleaning effectively is. And the goal of dry cleaning is to find out if somebody's following you, but also you've got to make sure it doesn't look like you're dry cleaning. So you don't, because the last thing you want is, because if the KGB suspect you're running someone, the last thing you want to do is confirm it for them by acting like a complete wally and doing lots of spy stuff, because then they're going to throw all the surveillance at you for weeks on end. The trick is, as Oleg puts it, is you want them to get bored of you, and you want to make them think that you're a low level whatever and not important, because every intelligence agency has finite resources. And so, they don't have unlimited manpower. And so they have to put that manpower on things they think are important. So if they think you're not important, over time they will give up on you. Obviously, you should never drop your guard, but you want to lull them into this sense of you're not important. And that's how you conduct espionage, basically. That's what I learned from Oleg, my KGB training via a book. But so the other spy film I would recommend is quite a good one about the CIA called Spy Game with Robert Redford and Brad Pitt. Now, it is quite a showy movie, but it kind of talks about different eras of the CIA, from Vietnam, the Cold War, to the 90s. And it's all about, it's sort of this sort of story about this seasoned spy played by Robert Redford, who has to try and outwit management and kind of set up a rescue mission for his protege who's been arrested in China and is about to be executed. And it's a really cool film. And it's got lots of realism within it, whilst a lot of crazy action film stuff too. But I spoke to Michael Frost Beckner on my podcast a few years ago. So he's the guy who wrote that. And Michael Frost Beckner does know what he's talking about. And he also ran a show called The Agency, which was the first ever American show to film at the CIA. And quite a few directors from Homicide did go on to do The Agency. And Jay directed an episode of The Agency, but he just forgot about it.
So for our listeners that don't know, Chris has a podcast called Secrets and Spies. Very professional. It's not a conspiracy theory show. It is actual interviews with MI5 people, former spies, who like Chris just said, in CIA that all have written books since they've gotten out of the life. But when did you start Secrets and Spies? It's almost 10 years now?
Nearly. It's 2016 is when it started, yeah. So it was just as I'd finished making The Dry Cleaner. And like with low-budget films, they always take a lot longer than you think to finish them because you're pulling favors. So with The Dry Cleaner, we had like our editor I was pulling favors for our to get our editor to work on a film. We had some motion graphic stuff involving facial recognition that required a favor, but we couldn't do that until we had picture lock. And then I couldn't get picture lock because then the year after The Dry Cleaner, I suddenly did a lot of directing of commercials for a bit. And then my editor was editing a lot of stuff. So we had a lot of problems. It took like 2 to 3 years to finish the film. And so out of all that sort of frustration, the podcast was sort of born. And because I was sitting on a lot of material that I'd used for my research, and I don't know, I'd also became a big podcast fan. So my other passion when I was a kid was radio, and a TV show called Midnight Caller with Gary Cole, who is this crime fighting DJ. So the other fantasy in life, isn't it? And so so sort of weirdly, podcasting ended up becoming this weird natural progression of what I do, and it just sort of partly was supposed to be a research tool to inform my writing, and then it kind of became its own thing. And now I'm in a weird place where I'm becoming a more successful podcaster than I am filmmaker.
So we got to start getting paid.
Yeah. So it's quite funny. So
that's how. So Chris's podcast, Secrets and Spies, is what led to this podcast, because without that, we would not have this incredible expertise behind us. Chris does all the tech. Chris had the platform. Chris did everything. I basically, as a former journalist, do the research and the questions, and obviously we interview people together. But without Chris's background, technical knowledge, and the podcast he'd already had up and running for years, this would have never happened. So
we certainly made it a lot easier.
Interesting progression.
Yeah, and I remember, with podcasting, it's all about sort of you got to get a rhythm with it and a life balance, and I think it's very easy to kind of try to do too much too soon, if you know what I mean, and burn yourself out. And that's one lesson I learned a long time ago. So like with Secrets and Spies, we were monthly for a good few years, and then progressed to being every 2 weeks, and now we're weekly, and it's taken a long time to build up to that.
You're weekly. That just
I know, it's insane, isn't
my
it?
mind.
I know. So it's like
you're weekly, and you are also still doing some filmmaking, producing in between. It's just as
I know.
And this, which
so
is obviously we're monthly, but nevertheless still, because Chris does all the editing and all the sound smoothing out and all that. Really,
Yeah.
I don't know how you there must be 2 Chris cars as far as I'm
I
concerned.
wish, God.
At least.
Yeah, get into cloning, but yeah. Oh my goodness, no. I think my other passion in life, coffee, helps in that department.
There you go. That'll help. I had a good day yesterday, and I was thinking, "Wow, I must be feeling better. I had a really good day yesterday." I realized I had, like, 5 cups of coffee. Of course, my coffee, I have to make half calf
Oh,
because I
okay,
have the
yeah,
heart skipping thing, but still, it was like, "That's how you got all that done yesterday?"
yeah. It
Ay, ay,
helps.
ay, ay,
Yeah,
ay.
good old coffee. But look, I mean, that's probably enough about me. I mean, honestly, Susan, I mean, one of the things that's blown me away about you is you've worked on so many very cool films. I mean, not only have you worked on what I think was the best police show ever made, still, um, you've worked on like Scarface. You've worked on, Stop Making Sense, which is this legendary concert film directed by Jonathan Demme. You've worked on Murder She Wrote, Gettysburg. So many interesting things. So how did you get started in pursuing film? What started you on that journey?
The short answer would be I only took things that were iconic. No,
Mm.
just kidding. Um, e Everything was a huge go figure, how did that happen, accident. I often talk about this, about how we have moments, and you probably had moments like this too, moments in your life that if they hadn't happened, you wonder what path your life would have
Mm,
led, right?
mm.
And I know Boots talked about his roommate bringing the camera, the parents of his roommate bringing the camera and say, "Finish off the roll," which he'd never, had any inkling or interest in camera or filmmaking. So I just have to talk about how everything started. I grew up in a household where we watched a lot of old movies, very, very respectful of old movies, of old black and white movies. When I was a kid, they were throwing everything on television to fill television airtime up. So Saturday mornings was the Dead End Kids, the Three Stooges. I mean, all those kind of like 1930s serials. And then, of course, Saturday night movie, the Sunday night movie, the Friday night movie were all old movies. And although I'm sure my mother watched some of these with me, I remember more watching them with my dad. And my dad knew every character actor, every person in the films. So I got a really good background at home when I was young, just of watching old films. And I don't know, that just was sort of by accident. And then our local library used to rent out, I think they were a dollar, maybe, I think they were a dollar. They were called, it was a film called Black Hawk that transferred famous old silent films to Super 8.
Oh, cool.
So sometimes on a Friday night or a birthday, my parents would set up the projector and all the kids, on our street would come up into the living room and we would watch like Charlie Chaplin movies
Oh,
or
nice.
Buster Keaton movies
Mm,
in the living room. Um, but I never thought, it never occurred to me, probably like you when you were young, that you could actually have a job,
mm.
in the movies. My dad was a radio engineer, so there was a little more open idea in the house that you could do something interesting, right? Like be in radio. My brother ended up going into television. He's an Emmy award-winning television engineer. So I went into high school, regular high school here at Woodlawn High. Hoot hoot, go Warriors.
The-
And 2 of the teachers were film buffs, a social studies teacher and an English teacher, and they taught, it never been done before. I don't think it ever was done since. They taught a film history class one semester that I was lucky enough to take. And I did a paper on the special effects in horror films, including King Kong.
Nice.
The original, excuse me, the only King Kong, as far as I'm concerned, is the original 1933 stop action
Mm,
film, which
mm.
boggled my mind when I read how they made that. What do I know? I didn't know anything when I was that age, when I was 16. When I read how they made King Kong, it like, completely obsessed me. Was completely fascinated with it, and I think some of it was my initial approach, and probably always my approach to filmmaking was technical as opposed to artistic. I don't think I ever had an artistic bent to make my own films. I think the technical side was always the thing that I was interested in.
Mm.
Anyway, so I took that class, and then I found out that University of Maryland, Baltimore County, UMBC, had a film program, and it was not a major at the time, and I thought, well, I'll take American Studies as my major, and I'll have a film minor. And the semester that I started there, they had a film major. And Boots talked about it. And when we have other guests on, then we'll have another guest on, I think, that also went through the program there. It was a ridiculously amazing amount of equipment and access. And it was just unbelievable to be in the ground floor of that. So I worked there. So I got to teach people how to use the Arri BL. We had Beaulieus, we had CP16s, we had Nagras, and we, of course, had Super 8 films. We also started out with black and white Portapacks that were two system, the camera and the reel-to-reel
Yeah.
half-inch tape separately. We learned how to edit video. We learned how to edit film. And we also did outside projects for commercial companies. So then we got actual commercial filmmaking experience while we were still in school. So that was just, and also an amazing group of intelligent, interesting, artistic students that were there. Now, you talked about having Jack Cardiff at school. The only, I think, famous filmmakers I remember were the Maisel brothers, who were pretty famous documentary filmmakers. They came and talked to us about what they did. These are the guys that did Grey Gardens. Everybody out there, if you haven't seen the original documentary, not the dramatic film, which also was very good, but go back and watch the original documentary, Grey Gardens. Really kind of amazing. So, and then just happened, I got out of school. I was working on, like you, I'm sure did when you got out of school, working on little projects. Like I worked for companies that shot wedding videos.
Oh, I've done a
You
lot
just
of that.
sort of
Yeah,
feel like
yeah.
you're like, you're just treading water. You're not really getting anywhere yet. And I certainly wasn't using much of my skills that I learned at college. And then I had also been working for free for friends and doing free things. And one of my friends called and said, "Hey, I'm shooting a film in a broken down mansion in Green Spring Valley. Would you shoot it for me?" He wrote it and directed it. And I have vivid memory being on the phone with him thinking, God, I just told myself I was not going to work for free anymore. I'm not going to work for free anymore. But he was a really good friend. I thought, could always good experience, shooting some 16 millimeter black and white. We're on that film. We're shooting in the attic of this mansion that happened to have broken up into apartments. And some of our friends from UMBC, one in particular, Larry Singer, was a still photographer, I think lived there, and had told somebody else that was a former UMBC student who is now a producer in New York, came through to scout the location for a horror film called The House on Sorority Row. Now, if I hadn't said yes, and I'm only saying this to people, sometimes you just have to say yes to things. If your gut says say yes, even if you just told yourself the day before, I'm not saying yes to those things anymore. If I hadn't been there in that attic shooting that project with my friend from school, I would not have heard before anybody else knew there was a film company coming through to shoot a feature film. So I got in on the ground floor with that. I worked as a PA when they came to town, helping clean out the mansion before we shot there, and then gave them my resume to the production office and got brought on as a second assistant camera person. Arthur Eng, bless his heart, local AC, was the first AC. He taught me everything I needed to know about being a second assistant. And Tim Surstead, who is a very well-known LA cameraman, came into town to shoot it. He was originally from this area, from Silver Spring, I think. So here I am working with a Hollywood cameraman, a local camera assistant, but he was so good at teaching me everything. And then one day, as we're like probably a couple weeks into shooting or toward the end, Arthur sees a little tiny article in the back page of the New York Variety, which used to be like a broadsheet newspaper. I don't even know if it exists anymore. And it said that the Camera Union in Los Angeles is giving a training program, like the DGA, the Directors Guild of America, does a training program to get their people in the pipeline. The camera assistant, the camera local, which at that point was 659 international photographers, were giving a training program. And he said, why don't you try to do this? And I think the deadline was in a week, look, almost done. I took it home. I sent the application. I managed to get the application in just under the wire and got accepted into the training program to at least go first take the test. So I went to LA. I was also applying to UCLA grad school. I got into UCLA grad school. I thought, I'm going to apply for this training program while I'm at UCLA in the film program. And you go to take the test. You don't know it at the time, but there's 1,000 people there. I think DGA gives about 2,000, lets about 2,000 people take the test. 1,000 people taking the test. They whittle it down to the top 100 scores. They interview those 100 people, and they pick 10 people for the training program.
Wow. I
mean, even it still gives me goosebumps when I think about that now.
That's amazing.
I just remember at the time thinking, this is happening. I am making this happen. I mean, I took it so seriously. And so you go in for the interview. I go into an interview in West Hollywood, and I walk into the interview room, and there's a big, giant oak table. And around the oak table are the heads of the camera department at Burbank Studios, the head of the camera department at Universal Studios, the head of the camera department at Paramount Studios, the head of Contract Services Administration were the people that administered all the union stuff. It could have been incredibly intimidating. But for some reason, I was like, this is how I am getting this. I don't know what. And so because I had so much experience at UMBC, because I'd done a feature film before I got there, and at some point during the interview, they said, what are you going to do if you don't get into the training program? Well, apparently everybody else that I trained with later said, oh, I'm going to apply for the training program again. That never occurred to me. I said, look, I'm getting into the business. I'm either going to go get back again with Tim Surstead. He's a cameraman out here. The director works out here. I'm going to hit everything. I'm going to keep going to use. I'm going to do whatever I can. I am getting into the camera local. But people, like I said, people told me later, oh, I'm going to take the test again. Like that literally never occurred to me. So I got in. I got a letter at home. I remember my dad had apparently held the letter up to a light bulb before I got home to see whether I'd gotten in or not. And as I'm opening the letter, I see my dad has like tears in his eyes because he's so proud of me.
That's so cool.
So that, Arthur Ang, all props to Arthur Ang, because I never would have known about that training program if he hadn't seen that little ad in Variety. So I move out there. I had already been out there at UCLA for a quarter. I only went for a quarter because the training program started in January of the following year. So I finished at UCLA grad school and started the training program. Unlike the DGA, which is a 2-year program, the camera program was about 10 months to a year, somewhere in there. And at the time, the heads of the camera departments, which of course were old white guys, good white guys, but they were like, literally, these were World War II photog unit guys.
Wow,
these guys that had been, World War II photog unit guys that were now heading
they must
the
have
heads
some
of the camera
stories.
departments.
Wow.
Yeah, Dick Barlow was at Burbank, and the guy beneath him, whose last name was, I think it was Kelly was his last name. These old school, Navy photog guys. And I remember at the time, Dick Barlow, when we had one of our first meetings, said, this is not a quota program. And I felt like standing up and saying, thank you for doing a fucking quota program, because if it wasn't a quota program, I would not be here. So the 10 trainees were 5 white men, 2 Asian guys, 2 white women, and a black man. So it obviously was an effort to integrate the camera local, which was obviously overwhelmingly white men and a very, very difficult to get into. So that was just so what they did was they sent you out to all the loading rooms. At the time, all of the major studios had camera departments They had all their own cameras. They had these gigantic loading rooms where you could have like 5 or 10 people in there loading films for all the shows that are going on
Mm.
on the property, on the at the studio. That system was breaking down and going away when I was a trainee, turning into rental units. So camera would be from Panavision. You would go to Panavision and prep your equipment, load it onto a 5-ton truck. The 5-ton truck would sit outside the studio, outside the sound stage, and that's where you loaded your film. But when I started, the camera department still existed. So that's where I learned what the term whistling in the dark means.
Oh, okay. I
Because
don't know that
if
term. Yeah.
whistling in the dark basically is a way to remind yourself that you still exist in the dark,
Okay.
right? So we would be in these, especially at Burbank Studios, they had a gigantic loading room, and I'd be in there by myself for many, many minutes, downloading and uploading films that were, film that was coming in.
And they're done in the dark,
from the studios.
so you don't
Total
expose
darkness.
the film. Yeah.
Whenever you see things on TV where you're doing stuff and there's a red light on in the room and they have a whole scene in there, well, if you're actually unloading and loading the film, it is in complete and utter darkness. There's not many times in your life ever where you actually are in like velvet black darkness. There's just not many places where you are in complete darkness. And it gives you this eerie feeling. Like I used to feel like if I stepped the wrong way, I would fall into another dimension.
Yeah.
It sort of messes with your head.
Yeah.
So I learned to whistle in the dark to remind myself I was actually still in of this dimension. But anyway, that was an awesome experience. I have to give a shout out to my friend Linda Vincent, who was one of the loaders in the loading room. The other way to get into the camera local at the time was to be a loader and work in the loading room. Like, I don't know how many hours they needed to get before they could get on to working on a set. But here they are training the trainees who blow through there and get their camera local card, their union card, and they're training us. So props to them, because they also got in, but they got in behind us, which is a very politically difficult situation to be in. But they were absolutely terrific. And my friend Linda and I have been lifelong friends since then. And she was absolutely wonderful. Also, one of the few women also in the business at the time in camera. The other woman in the training program, Jo Carson, we had a choice. We could go into special effects camera. She went into special effects. So I literally never saw her again. I think she went on to work at Industrial Light and Magic and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But anyway, so we got thrown into all the loading rooms at all the major studios and then put on sets and taught by the second assistant on the set. So I came with some knowledge after having worked here on the House on Sorority Row. Still, a Hollywood set is quite the thing to be thrown into and to learn. It was pretty nerve-wracking until you really got your feet under you. But some of the things I worked on as a trainee, I worked on the TV show Lou Grant with Ed Asner. I worked on the Devlin Connection with Rock Hudson.
Oh, wow.
And Jack Scalia. I mean, Rock Hudson, that was just blew my mind to be on a set with Rock Hudson.
I bet.
And I have to tell you my Rock Hudson story.
Yeah,
we were working in one of the California has a string of missions that go throughout, closer to the coast, but go throughout the state, much of the state, from very old missions. We were shooting in one of the missions for this show. It was very early in my career, and it was raining cats and dogs. And so I'm struggling with my cartload of equipment. I have trying to cover everything. I'm so nervous, I don't want anything to get wet. And the mission had a cloistered area, so it had a courtyard that was covered, so I got all the equipment under there, and I'm totally flustered and nervous. It was one of my first days on the show, so I didn't quite know the camera assistant, the cameraman. I didn't know anybody yet. And at some point, I had one of those see-through plastic raincoats, those really cheap, you get at the dime store, and it had a snap-on hood. And I don't remember how, in some way, my hood falls off. and it falls off on the other side of the camera cart into a puddle.
Oh, no.
And I go around to bend over to pick it up, and this big hand in a gray suit comes in, and I'm bending over, and he's bending over, and he picks the rain hat up, and he says, "Here you go." And I look up, and it's freaking Rock Hudson, like right there in my face. This was before he got ill. It was when he was still just stunningly beautiful, 6'4", 6'5", whatever. And I think I probably just went, I had nothing. It just blew my mind. And then he just got up and went into the set. We were shooting inside the church.
I always remember him from the film Seconds, which is one of my favorite John Frankenheimer films. Oh my
Yes,
goodness,
I have to had that on my list of one of the ones to watch again. Yeah, that was an interesting film.
Mm.
And then I worked on a series. At the time it was called Second Family Tree, but when you look it up now, it's called Family Tree with Ann Archer and James Spader when he was like 17, like a nobody, right? And then the first feature I worked on in the training program was The Star Chamber with Michael Douglas and Hal Holbrook and Sharon Gless and Yaphet Kotto.
That's oh yeah.
So I crossed paths with Yaphet Kotto in like 1983, 10 years before I'm on Homicide.
Yeah.
And that was shot by Peter Hyams. Well, he was technically the director, but he shot the whole film.
He tends to do that.
He's a kid. Yeah.
Because like 2010, which I quite like, and Capricorn 1 and a few other films he's directed. He seems to be
he was always behind the camera. We had a DP of record, Dick Hanna, who, I hate to say this, Dick, if you're still out there, but spent a lot of time on the camera truck. So Peter really operated as the DP. And then the operator was Ralph Gerling, who was one of these really super old school guys.
Yeah.
Great people to work with. And then Mike Chavez was one of the camera assistants. And Mike is the person that recommended me for Scarface, which was the first film I worked on when I got out of the training program. In the training program, I also worked on Heart to Heart with Robert Wagner and Stephanie Powers, who were just a lot of fun to work with. I remember one day it was my birthday and I was on the camera truck getting stuff ready and I was getting the card out. And this woman comes up, puts her arms around me and says, "Oh, happy birthday. I'm so happy for you. It's been so nice having you on the show." And I'm looking at her. I literally have no idea who it was. And it was Stephanie Powers before she'd been in the makeup trailer.
Oh, wow. So she looked...
Stephanie Powers' entire face is covered with freckles, which you had never, ever seen, ever, in any movie she's ever been in, because she has stage makeup on. And finally, while she was in my face, I'm like, "Oh my God, that's Stephanie Powers." Terrific. They were absolutely, oh my God, they were so much fun.
Yeah.
But one day I wore a t-shirt to work that had James Dean's picture on it.
Oh, cool. From Rebel Without a Cause or something.
From Rebel Without a Cause, which was one of Natalie Wood's early adult films. Obviously, he had started as a child.
Yeah.
And Robert Wagner's assistant, one of his, close buddies, comes up to me and said, you need to take that t-shirt off. Because it's going to strike some chords with him, because he had lost Natalie Wood not
on the boat,
not soon before that, not too soon before that.
Oh yeah, it's like 1984, wasn't it, when she died? I think, wasn't it?
Somewhere in there.
Yeah,
it was obviously before I worked with it. So I went in the camera truck and turned my t-shirt on inside out so that you couldn't see him. Then the last thing I worked on as a trainee was the television series Casablanca.
Oh yes, I remember you telling me about it.
Which
I had no idea that existed till you told me that.
A remake of the film.
Yeah, that's hilarious.
Shot by Joe Byrock, who at the time was in his 80s, absolutely amazing hard lighter. But he had started his first film, I'm pretty sure it was his first film, co-photographed It's a Wonderful Life. So somehow they were, I don't know what the co-cinematographers were, but he was one of the cinematographers on It's a Wonderful Life. So these are the kind of people, like, I come into the business as these guys are still around, right?
That's so cool. Yeah.
And the coolest thing was they went back to the original blueprints from Casablanca and reconstructed the set based on the original blueprints. And so when you walked in there, if you like, put your hands up like blinders so you couldn't see off the set, you were on the 1940 set of Casablanca. I mean, it was amazing. Even down to they wanted to get the original lamps because, studios, they don't throw anything away. It's all in the prop shop. It's all, And so they wanted to get the original lamps to use that in the cafe scene, in Rick's cafe scene. But those lamps were working on another period TV show called Bring 'Em Back Alive on the Burbank Studios on Warner Brothers lot.
Bruce Boxleitner, I think. Yeah.
Bruce Boxleitner. And one of my friends, shout out to Jeff Norvett, he was working on Bring 'Em Back Alive. So they had the original Casablanca lamps in their show. But just absolutely amazing. Absolutely amazing. And then one of my, that show, this happened to me a couple times when I was a trainee. I had a trainee. The trainee was Laurie Craig, who had won an award from Toyota for screenplay and had won a car and the ability to come out and get on the soundstage with some productions. And so she became my trainee on Casablanca, and we are still good friends. She wrote the screenplay for Ella Enchanted and Paulie and a bunch of other films. When she grew up and it became, got an agent and, became a screenwriter in LA. So that was amazing. But then at the end of my training program, Mike Chavez recommended me, and I did maybe one or two things beforehand, like Wizards and Warriors. I did a test for Airplane 3. I worked on Dukes of Hazzard second unit, a couple of other things. And I was recommended for Scarface, which was my first film with John Alonzo. And John Alonzo had the best camera crew in the business. I mean, the camera crew was amazing. And weirdly enough, my very first day as a trainee, when I walked on to the back lot of Burbank Studios, I'm like completely lost. I don't know where the camera department is. I don't know how to get there. I'm like all nervous. I have no idea who it is. I walked through a set where they're shooting a film on the back lot. And there's these guys with little white, like terry cloth golf hats, white golf hats, a couple of guys. And I went up to one of them and I said, well, do you know where the camera department is? It turned out he was the gaffer. That was a John Alonzo film, Blue Thunder.
Oh,
was shooting on the.
I was going to ask about Blue Thunder in a minute if you were on that.
Was shooting on the back lot.
Yeah.
So the first time I walk into a back lot, I bump into Alonzo's camera crew. I don't know that until later. And I get on Scarface. So right out of the training program, I'm on this giant film, directed by Brian De Palma, written by Oliver Stone, who at the time was not super famous yet. Oliver Stone was not famous. Obviously, De Palma was, and obviously Pacino was. And the interesting thing that sort of dovetails, which we talked about when we interviewed Boots, was John Alonzo had come up. Actually, John Alonzo, you watch your late night Westerns and TV shows. John Alonzo was an actor for a while. He's in a Twilight Zone episode. He's in, I believe, The Magnificent Seven. He's in a couple films like that. And then he switched over. He wanted to be in camera. He worked with people like James Wong Howe. If you don't know who James Wong Howe
James
is,
Wong Howe's amazing.
Amazing black and white, also color, but he's amazing. Black and white cinematographer. So John Alonzo came up through that route. Not usual to have, a Latino camera cinematographer in LA in the 80s. This, was not like there were no black cinematographers. There were no women cinematographers. So, he was a groundbreaker for sure. And he had worked with some big dudes.
Famous for Chinatown, isn't he? That's the one.
Chinatown, yes. Yeah, he was nominated for that.
Yeah, and I remember him from Star Trek Generations because he was the DP on that. And he had this sort of trademark warm lighting that was coming through a window in one or two scenes. But yeah.
Yeah, so we would sometimes, when we were working exteriors and he was looking through his contrast glass and trying to figure out, how we're shooting, if it's bright and then a cloud goes by or whatever, he would always look through the contrast glass and say, Jimmy, help me out, talking to James Wong Howe. But the interesting connection, which we talked about with Boots, was John Alonzo was known for his handheld camera work, 1,000-foot magazine on the back, short zoom on the front. And a lot of directors did not want to use the handheld camera work, but he used it very
Yeah.
effectively in films like Norma Ray. He also shot Norma Ray. I mean, look him up. He did a lot of really interesting things where he did get to use the handheld camera work. On Scarface, basically De Palma would just go, no. We would start setting it up for handheld, and De Palma would go, no, John. But I remember at one point, so we had always had basically 2 camera crews going because there was just so much, so much of the shooting and the big scenes with the gun. I mean, the guns going off and the machine guns and the blood everywhere.
Grenade launcher on bottom of a gun, his little friend.
And the day that Pacino burned his hand on the barrel of the gun.
Yeah. What was that like being there in that moment?
Well, screaming and falling on the ground. Now, I read a thing in his memoir. By the way, people, his memoir is absolutely terrific. There's a lot of celebrity memoirs that aren't great. His is absolutely terrific. And he talks about going to the hospital, and I don't remember that. I remember him screaming when he burnt his hand, but I don't remember him going away. I guess he did. But there was blood everywhere all the time. I remember my shoes sticking to the floor, specifically the scene where they're cutting off Angel's leg or arm or something with a chainsaw. One of the scenes.
Oh yeah, I remember that scene.
Yeah, so the exteriors and things, they shot in Miami for a week and they shot in New York for a couple days for the exteriors and also for the blue screen backgrounds that we used. But everything else was shot in LA and also in Mendocino, which is north of LA. But it was a 6 months. I started on it in November. We weren't done until like May. It was the longest thing besides a TV series I'd ever worked on. Gigantic. I remember being in the lobby, that scene in the lobby where he dies at the end, where there's the 2 spiral staircase, arcing staircases that come down and the reflecting pool at the bottom that he falls into. And of course, we did a lot of takes of like all the Marielitos like running through the house, like with the machine guns and everything. And John Toll, who was the B camera operator, who became in his own right a famous cinematographer later, John Toll like puts his arm around me and says, watch what's happening here because you will never see this again. Meaning just the scope and, the bigness of it, but also just the character of it was really quite astounding to be in the middle of. I remember one day also being on that set, and John had set up, I don't think this had been done anywhere else, a giant silk that covered the entire ceiling of the set. The lights are on the catwalks above the silk. And we're all sitting there, we're setting up a shot at some point, and we hear this pop. And everybody looks up, and one of the bulbs had blown, and I suppose the filament or the hot glass came through the silk, and we're all looking up, and there's a little tiny hole, and it gets bigger and bigger, and then the flames are licking at the edges of the hole. The entire silk starts to burn to the edges, and this is Soundstage 12 at Universal Studios, which is at the time the biggest or second biggest soundstage in Hollywood. It is gigantic, and it's got 100-year-old wood in it. I mean, it is old, right? So we're all standing under it and realize that this place is about to catch on fire, right? It's already catching on fire because the silk is burning to the edges, to the edges of the wooden catwalks. So we all got out. Luckily, Universal had on the studio grounds had a fire department. And the fire department comes in and literally hoses down the entire set. I mean, like hoses it. I mean, I got to hose it down. It's on fire, right? I don't believe any of the catwalks caught. They caught it before, it went anywhere else. The silk basically almost like just disappeared, right? It wasn't giant flames, but it was flames, and it just sort of evaporated with the flames. It was really strange. And then the suits came down from the Black Tower. There's a black glass tower in the Universal. They came down, and we were always on the edge, like on Homicide, like, are they going to shut us down because we're over schedule, we're over budget, we're over this, we're over that. I mean, my recollection is Pacino had a deal, pay or play deal, that he got $50,000 a day for every day if we went over schedule, and we went over a month.
Yeah,
Now,
jeez.
whether that's true or not, that's what I remember.
Yeah.
Al, you can like email us and tell us if that's true.
Yeah.
So he made out eventually, but that was an incredible experience. And by the end, the entire crew was crazy. We were all shell shocked, and it was also at the height of the cocaine industry. And so I wasn't doing it. I couldn't. I had tried it once. I never do that stuff. Lots of cocaine usage because we had these long days.
Well, this is the problem with cocaine. Yeah, it's the upper.
Yeah. Yeah. Although that's not what Pacino was a prince. He was in character the whole time. He never got out of that Tony character. I think later in his career, he stopped with that sort of method kind of thing. But he was snorting milk sugar all that whole time, which probably ruined his sinuses. Who knows what that did to him.
Jeez.
But when we were shooting in Mendocino, Universal was known at the time as being historically cheap, like super cheap. And when we were shooting in Mendocino, he gave us a party at the hotel we were shooting at. He paid for it. He sat off in the corner at his table, and he gave the crew a party. We didn't get much respect from the studio heads. They didn't pay very well, and they also just weren't great. I mean, they paid fine, but they were known as being cheap. The next day on the set, we're shooting at one of the mansions in Mendocino, and or Santa Barbara, and Pacino walks on the set, and the entire crew stands back in a line and claps as he walks in to thank him for giving us and realizing giving us a party, and his party was in essence thanking us for our hard work. So I always have deep respect for him for doing that. But yeah, Scarface, that was amazing. And so then I worked on a bunch of other things with Alonzo.
So I wanted to ask you about one of the most successful crime shows of all time, Murder, She Wrote. How did that come about?
So after Scarface, I worked on The Yellow Rose with Sam Elliott and Sybil Shepherd. I did Stop Making Sense, Jonathan Demme and Jordan Cronenweth. Somewhere along the line, I don't know if it was before. I worked with Dennis Dalzell and his crew. Jeff Norvett and Bill Garrett was the operator. Jeff was the first assistant. Somewhere I worked with them. It might have been on Wizards and Warriors. And then they asked me to come on Murder, She Wrote with them. And I did do 37 episodes of Murder, She Wrote. Somewhere in the middle, the middle seasons, maybe 2 and 3 or 3 and 4, somewhere in there, early on in its many years, in its many seasons. And they were nice enough, bless them, that when John Alonzo had a film and they asked me to be on that, they would let me go do a feature and come back to Murder, She Wrote. So I was very lucky, very, very, very lucky. I worked with, Dennis Dalzell was an absolute prince of a cinematographer. He had a wild reputation, apparently earlier in his career, but had settled down, was an absolutely lovely man. And so was his operator, Bill Garrett, and Jeff Norvett, still friends to this day, just absolutely. I don't know how I lucked into working with some of the most amazing people. So here I am. I'm all set up. I work with a very well-known feature cameraman, and when I'm not doing that, I'm back with these guys that are doing television. And they also did V and a number of other things.
Oh yeah, V's a classic. Yeah.
So Murder, She Wrote, obviously iconic today. And funny when you watch it now. I would say if you can look on IMDb and watch the episodes that Dennis shot, he lit Angela Lansbury so beautifully. I think I said this on another episode. We had a special lavender net that we used in front of the camera, and then a lavender net that they used in front of the lights. He also did that classic lighting on women. They use it mostly on women. I'll say that. That sounds discriminatory, but they did back in the day. Very high hot light, very high, hot light directly in front. There's a little tiny shadow under the nose and blows out any wrinkles or anything else you got going on there.
I could do with that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, me too. I need one now. So, she looked terrific. I don't know what happened. I know that he took a lot of time to light her, and I think at some point they wanted him to hurry up. And we unceremoniously got canned
Oh, no.
from the show. I think because Dennis was taking too much time to light her, but she looked the show looked terrific under his cinematography. So I'd say if you can look on IMDb, go watch a couple episodes that he shot because it was gorgeous. Some of the guys earlier and later, very much, we've talked to this on earlier. I'm not dissing anybody, but because you have to work so fast in TV, very flat, sort of bright TV lighting. He did a terrific job, and he was terrific. And we all quit with him, of course. It's like, we're going with you, dude. Like,
Oh, yeah.
we're all heading out. But that was interesting because, of course, I said earlier, I grew up watching all these old films. And who are the guest stars? You know?
Well, one of them was Patrick McNee, who you're a big fan of.
Right. Well, Patrick McNee, I was a huge fan growing up of The Avengers with Patrick McNee and Diana Rigg. Diana Rigg was my idol growing up. And I left the show for a week or so. My mom's first incidence with breast cancer.
Ooh, okay.
So I left to go home, and that was the episode Patrick McNee came on. I came on the very last day. I came back from Baltimore to LA the very last day. Patrick McNee was on, and we had one scene with him first thing in the morning on the back lot, coming out of a movie theater or something, or a theater. And I made sure, believe me, I walked up to him and shook his hand and said, I just have to tell you, I grew up watching the Avengers, and you guys were my idols, and whatever I blabbered all over him. At that point, I was a little better than I was with Rock Hudson.
How was Patrick McNee when you said that? What did he say to you? What was he?
Oh, he was completely gracious, like you would expect him to be. Just terrific. And he looked great. Just really sweet. So some of the other people on the show when I was on it, Cesar Romero, who was the Joker in the original Batman series, among many, many, many other earlier big films. Stuart Granger.
Oh, yes, classic.
Stuart Granger was a huge famous British actor. One of the things I remember about Stuart Granger, and I remember about all of the old Hollywood actors that we had. Now, you expect these old Hollywood actors to be like hiding somewhere in a dressing room. These people were ready. They were in makeup, in costume, and often I remember Stuart Granger being on the set for whatever, I don't remember what the scene was, in his pajamas. The scene was he was in his pajamas. Famous actor Stuart Granger in his pajamas, ready. He wasn't in his trailer in a dressing room. He was on the set in a director's chair in his pajamas, waiting to go on, ready to go. And that's what I remember about the old Hollywood actors was, man, they were there and they were ready to go. There was no scraping them out of the trailer, scraping them out of a dressing room anywhere. They were terrific. And also Roddy McDowall, who I also worked with on Overboard, Judy Geeson, who was also a big British actress, Sid Charisse. I mean, come on, Sid Charisse. I mean, I was a huge, crazy Fred Astaire fan. And Sid Charisse was in, I think it was The Bandwagon. Anyway, big Hollywood Technicolor Fred Astaire movie. Sid Charisse, Howard Keel. I mean, these people just like unbelievable. But the thing I remember most about Angela Lansbury, completely terrific, wonderful person. She would come on the set sometimes from across the soundstage. We shot this at Universal, and a lot of it obviously was done in sets and also on the back lot, including we were near the studio tours.
So, yeah, I've been on that.
And we
tour,
we were taught. So was I before I got in the business. We were taught you do not stop the tour bus. Right? That was their big money at Universal, right? So like you're shooting like a famous TV show.
You got to stop for the bus.
This tour bus does not stop. We had to stop for the bus. So I don't know how many thousands of of films or, Super 8 films and people snapshots of their vacations in Hollywood, and me and Jeff are there like waving and jumping up and down as the tour bus went by. So that was always fun. So we always shot back where like Bruce the shark, the mechanical shark from Jaws
I've
was.
seen that shark. Yeah, I've seen the Psycho house. Apparently, they have a woman with a knife running after the bus sometimes, but they didn't. They didn't do it
Doing
the
that.
day I was there, sadly. But
So that was always fun shooting on the back lot. But I have one. This is not a funny story. I have one really weird memory from working on Murder She Wrote. We were going off the lot, just a couple of blocks to a funeral home, to shoot in a funeral home one morning, and in the van on the way to the funeral home, we hear that
oh yeah, that's
um,
1986. Yeah.
the Challenger
Mm,
has
mm.
exploded. And we go to the funeral home, and as we're setting up inside, and everybody was, pretty sort of stunned by that and quiet. And I go into the funeral home, into the showroom, and there's 7 caskets in there, which is how many people died on the Challenger. It was just struck me at the time, was like, "Oh, okay, that's just
Horrific
really
synchronicity.
weird."
Yeah.
Yeah,
Mm.
but, Angela Lansbury was terrific. Sometimes she would come, you'd hear her come in from across the sound stage, and she would start, she did Gypsy on stage, right? So sometimes she'd hear her from across the sound stage going, "I have a dream about you, baby." So she was just really a
Mm,
character,
mm.
and really terrific. And her brother, Peter, I think it was her brother, was one of the producers on the show, and her son, Anthony, directed some. So he was there sometimes too. But yeah, that was a terrific experience. And like I said, that camera crew, those guys, absolutely love those guys to death. They're really terrific, terrific people. And V, I think we were only on for a month or so. Um, on V, that was where I figured out that who Robert England was, the
Oh
guy
yeah.
that played Friday the 13th, right? It was just
Yeah,
Robert England without
that's
his
it.
scary
Yeah, yeah,
makeup
yeah.
on. Without his Freddy makeup on, right? And Mark Singer, he was terrific. Mark Singer was in that. He was a really sweetheart. And so the other stuff I worked with on with Alonzo, including Overboard, also Jojo Dancer, Your Life is Calling, which was the semi-autobiographical film that Richard Pryor made
Yeah.
about his life. Richard Pryor was absolutely terrific, sweet, just a really sweet, sweet, sweet. He was such a sweet person. We shot in Peoria because that's where you know, part of his growing up, and or the characters growing up. And I had relatives
Mm.
in Peoria, and they came out to the set. And one of my cousins' daughters had Down syndrome, and so he was so sweet. He like talked to them. He took pictures with Karen on the front porch of the house we were
Yeah.
shooting in, and that ended up in the
Oh, that's
local
cool.
paper. He was just a sweetheart. And watching him, some of those things he had to relive, like lighting himself on fire. We shot the scene where he dumps a rum all over his head, and then it cuts to the window exploding as he catches on fire. And I don't know, have I told this story on another episode?
No.
So we're in a mansion, where he had been had in the story, and also obviously in his life, had vowed he was never going to do any more rock at the time. I guess we call it crack now, but he was going to smoke any more rock. And then he finds one in the carpet, and he goes around crawling on his hands and knees and like starts smoking the crack, the rock. And then at some point he gets so upset, he dumps the rum all
Mm.
over his head.
Mm.
And I'm watching this and I'm seeing how incredibly this is an emotionally super difficult emotional thing for him to, I mean, can you imagine the
Yeah.
PTSD from that and then reliving it? Now he's also directing it. He's
Mm.
acting and
Mm.
he's directing it. So it's his thing, right? And I remember he dumps the rum, and it was probably water or something, dumps it all over his head, and he's just standing there and he says, "Cut." And the set gets really busy. All the guys are going to change the lights because we're going to go
Mm.
outside. We
Mm.
take the camera outside and we're going to shoot from the other side with the window exploding with the, flames and whatever. And he's just standing there by himself. And I went up and put my hand on his back. I didn't say anything. And he said, "Thank you." Because I could just see, it's like, I could
Yeah.
not imagine what that would be like for him to relive that. And, yeah, he was absolute prince. He was a terrific, him. And Gary Marshall, another one of my favorite directors ever. Gary Marshall, who did Overboard and also Nothing in Common, which was an early Tom Hanks film, with Eva Marie Saint and Jackie Gleason. I mean, Jackie Gleason, come on. I mean, he was an old grouch, but he was an amazing person to watch. And Eva Marie Saint, weirdly enough, I don't know how I found this out. Maybe my mom told me. One of my uncles used to be a very well-known radio personality in New York in the probably 40s. And Eva Marie Saint was in one of the shows that my Uncle Dick used to announce for. And I went up to her at some point during the show and said, "I don't know if you remember, my Uncle Dick, was on I don't remember which CBS radio, I don't remember what show it was that he did with her." I said, "Do you remember who Dick Dunham is?" And she shakes my hand. She goes, "Oh my gosh, what a good-looking man he was." So she remembered my Uncle Dick, which was really nice. That was fun. Tom Hanks was a lot of fun. That was young, crazy. That was a young, crazy Tom Hanks. And then all the guys in it that were his compadres at the ad agency were all Second City people. I think we talked about
Yes,
this
with
in the
Isabella.
Isabella episode.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Dan Castellaneta, I think his name is, who went on to do The Simpsons. These guys went on to to become the big
Fantastic.
stuff. Also did Isabella and I talked about Real Men, which was another John Alonzo film with John Ritter and Jim Belushi. Great fun great fun to make. Although some of it was kind of difficult because it was in a seriously disgusting neighborhood. I hate to say that, but it was a neighborhood that was mostly abandoned, and there was an animal rendering plant next to it.
Yeah.
And so at some point in the afternoon, they would start rendering the animals, and it was like you couldn't breathe. And it was like, really, I couldn't imagine people had to live next door to that.
Oh yeah, God, horrendous.
And then there was The Great Outdoors with Dan Aykroyd and John Candy, and a 1,400-pound Kodiak bear. Now, that wasn't John Alonzo.
Oh, is this the famous TV bear? I think it's some. Yes.
Yes,
That's
Bart
it.
the bear,
Yeah.
Bart the famous bear. And that was Rick Waite. Rick Waite was the cameraman on that, who I think that was the only thing I ever worked with him on. And Ricky Mention was his first assistant, who was absolute prince. Ricky, if you're out there, loved working with him. But the bear, weirdly enough, the bear was originally from this area. He was adopted. He was adopted when he was a pup, or whatever you call bear cubs, when he was little, and then trained and ended up in the movies and TV. But he's originally either from Annapolis or somewhere around in Maryland, which is really weird.
It's a question about this bear. Was he down to earth or was he a diva?
He was down to earth. They would bring him in. He had a gigantic dog crate, but like gigantic, right? Because this guy, when he stood up on his hind feet, he was freaking 12 feet tall or something. I mean, he was just a stunning piece of animal. And they had built the entire house that they show outside on Big Bear Lake in the film. They had rebuilt the entire house inside, same studio, same stage that we shot Scarface on, stage 12 at Universal. Gigantic house, pine trees. I mean, the whole thing. You thought you were somewhere else. And so when we shot with Bart, they had to put a perimeter around the set with electrified fence.
Okay.
So Bart would not pass the electrified fence, okay? There's a scene where he comes into the house and wrecks the inside of the house. And at some point, he's chasing the actors. I don't remember if it was just the women or also John Candy and Dan Aykroyd. Anyway, so the cameraman, bless his heart, Rick Waite, pretty macho kind of guy, decides we're going to be on the C camera. So we have an Arri 2C, silent camera. They've got a couple of, I guess the other cameras are out on the porch outside the electric fence. Where am I? I'm inside the electric fence with the macho cameraman with the Arri 2C. I'm pulling focus. Bart the bear is in front of us. We're backing up the stairs. I have at least one or two, we've talked about this, the focus whip, so I could get as far back as I could. The bear was taught by the trainers right next to us with a baton about 1.5 feet long, a wooden baton about 1.5 feet long. The bear is trained when you shake the baton in his face, he opens his giant maw. Now, he's not growling, but you could see all the way to his tonsils, his giant bear teeth and everything. So what are we doing? We're doing close-ups on the bear, the 1,400-pound Kodiak bear. And the whole time I'm thinking, what the heck am I doing? I mean, obviously, when you work with animals, they're like, oh, they're trained. Oh, they're docile. Oh, they're this, they're that. It's like that bear, they could take one swipe in friendliness and take your head off. I mean, the guy, he was ginormous.
Yeah. He could have a bad day for
Exactly.
He could not have his coffee or something,
So that was when you watch the film, there may be one quick cut that we did of that. It was kind of creepy. And then one night we shot Night Exterior at Griffith Park. And same thing. I don't remember if we had shots of him running through the woods, because there was a scene where he goes into a cave and there's little girls that are in the family that are missing, and they're down in the cave, and the bear goes in the cave with them. So we're shooting some exteriors on Griffith Park, and they got the electrified fence and everything. And I go into the camera truck to get something, and probably to get a jacket. I reach up to the top shelf. This is so typical of guys. I reach up to the top shelf to get my weather gear down. And the sound mixer's duffel bag was up there, and I accidentally bump into it, and a chrome Glock falls out of his duffel bag onto the floor of the camera truck next to me. Very easily could have gone off and killed me. But apparently all the guys were packing that night, because we were out in the wilds, I guess, with the bear, and they figured they're going to shoot the bear if the bear goes crazy. I don't know. But it was another one of those situations where, like, okay, guys, just leave your guns at home.
Yeah.
That would be helpful. But that was fun. Those guys, John Candy, and they were terrific. They were a lot of fun. But the bear was incredible. They would hand them to open an entire 6-pack of high C juice, give him the entire 6-pack. He would drink the whole 6-pack at once, and a dozen donuts. This is what they gave the guy to wake up. He'd be, like sleeping in his giant crate, and then they would wake him up with a 6-pack of juice and a dozen donuts. But yeah, that was
unbelievable
experience being with him. And then I worked on other stuff, like a couple days on Lethal Weapon 2, where we're blowing houses up.
Yeah, you were talking about this house exploding and something melted on the camera.
So there was an Area 2C probably dug in a hole in the middle of the yard, and the third or fourth camera assistant had put a plastic bag over it to protect it. And it didn't matter what show you worked on. If the special effects guys were setting stuff up, you better walk 10 paces farther back than they tell you to walk, because they love blowing stuff up, right? That's what they love. That's what they do. So this house, once again, in some neighborhood that was falling apart. I don't remember where we were. The entire house, the entire house is obliterated in one big, there was probably multiple charges, but I just remember just this gigantic, explosion and mushroom cloud, literally mushroom cloud. That's how big the explosions were. And the entire plastic bag melted onto the camera because it was in such proximity, this giant fireball. I remember the poor guy, the third assistant camera, was like freaking out. Like, and we were like, do not, he started running into it while everything was still on fire and falling from the skies. Like, do not leave it. Do not run in there while the thing is melting. That was also the night we worked in, I think, San Pedro, which is right on the water. And they exploded the shipping container, and the Mercedes blows out of it into the harbor with all the money coming out. And then we were shooting in a derelict old boat. There was a big gun battle in the derelict part of the boat.
Yeah, that's it, where Joss Ackland, he says he has diplomatic immunity, and then Danny Glover says, it's just been revoked, as he shoots him. Yeah. I remember that.
And we shot, for some reason, we shot some process shots in there. Process shots are when, it's a car chase, but the people really aren't on the street. So we shot a bunch of black screen, actually, and I guess they keyed in the stuff later of Mel Gibson hanging off the back of the car. And that was, I think I've told you this before, he was the only person I was nervous about banging a slate in front of, was Mel Gibson. I've worked with all these other giant stars. I don't know why. I don't know why he intimidated me.
How was he? Was he all right?
Yeah, yeah. I don't remember anything bad. He just, they were all having a good time. I mean, that was talk about a macho show. That was a macho.
Yeah.
That was a macho show. And Quantum Leap with Scott Bakula.
Oh, Quantum Leap and
Dean Stockwell. What a prince too. Just
oh man, that's such a classic show. Childhood show.
True. And that was with a cameraman named Hank Lebo, which I worked on a couple of TV shows with. I think he also shot Hard Copy, which was not the news show, but a TV show about working in a newspaper. But Scott Bakula and Dean Stockwell were just sweethearts. We shot one episode in a somebody asked me about this recently, that building. It's this famous building in downtown
Bradbury building?
LA called the Bradbury Building. Yeah. Yeah. Isn't that amazing?
I've been in there. It's such a great place from Blade Runner and stuff.
Yeah. So it's got all that amazing, wrought iron, cast iron work inside, and the wrought iron elevators.
Is that the one where he's a private eye?
Yes.
And Claudia Christian's in that episode because she was in Babylon 5.
Really?
So,
yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
I remember this episode.
I used to bring home VHS tapes of dailies from stuff like that. And I had some dailies from that. Who knows where that all went.
How funny. Oh, cool. That's such a cool building, the Bradbury building. It's beautiful. I was in there in
amazing.
2017. Just so cool. Sadly, as a member of the public, you can't go up to the top floors where they film the Blade Runner stuff, but it's just, it's so unique, and it's been in so many shows.
They preserved it, but it's not a working building, is it, anymore?
I think it is. Well, it sort of is. It's used a lot for filming, but no.
Right, but as far as people having offices and stuff, I don't know that it's...
I think on the top floors they might. I could be wrong. But it because you can't go up beyond, I think it's the third or fourth floor, if I remember correctly. So after that, it's all private. So I'm assuming it's either residential or his offices or something. I don't know, but such a cool building.
Yeah, that was fun. I think the last thing I worked on, I was working on a show called Snoops. Lloyd Ahern was the cameraman on that, and Bob LaBonge was the operator, or Alan Easton was the operator. Bob LaBonge maybe was the first assistant. We started it in L.A., but then because it was about a husband and wife PI team in D.C., we came back to D.C. to shoot. So we shot in D.C., and I think that was the last thing I did when I first quit the business, because I came back into the business later when I was on Homicide. And that was Tim and Daphne Reed. They were really fun, but it was funny. They weren't from here, so they would say when they would mispronounce things, like the Potomac River would be like Potomac River, because they weren't from they were from LA or from wherever. They weren't from DC, and people would have to no, it's the Potomac River. And then backing up a little bit, I worked on a TV film called The Women of San Quentin, which was about the women guards, the prison guards at San Quentin, with Stella Stevens, and Bob Stedman was the camera on that. But that was not just Yaphet Kotto again. So that's the second time I worked with Yaphet Kotto before Homicide. And he recognized why he would recognize me from being, as I was a trainee, I was a scared little person on Star Chamber, but he recognized me and said hi. He was so sweet. And he did the same thing when I came in on the set on Homicide. So
nice.
Props to him. He was a real sweetheart. But we did a big scene in an abandoned prison in Colorado, where there was a big prison riot scene with the real prisoners. And like Gettysburg, where when we did in the movie Gettysburg, when we shot on the actual Pickett's Charge field, and the Confederate reenactors were hell-bent on taking it this time, did not want to stop when everybody said cut. The prison guys in the riot scene, they had a hard time getting them to stop. Luckily, everybody had
method.
Yeah, luckily everybody had rubber pipes and rubber bricks. But they were having a good old time. That was beautiful, though. That was, I don't remember, outside of Colorado Springs, an abandoned prison there. But Gettysburg. So I quit the business for a couple years, and then got back in the business. I got married and divorced in 3.5 minutes. And when I got divorced, I was like, oh my God, what am I going to do with myself? I
Mm-mm.
made a couple phone calls and I got back into the business here. And one of the first things I did a bunch of commercials and stuff, but did Gettysburg, and that was obviously close. Well, it wasn't close by. It's about an hour drive from here.
Mm.
Absolutely wonderful. Case Van Noostrom shot that.
You had a relative who was in the real Gettysburg, didn't you?
Yes.
What was that sort of like for you with this sort of family connection to the whole thing?
Yeah, so weirdly, my brother and I didn't know we had a family connection until my brother had come to visit the set, and then my parents came up to visit the set one day, and my mom said, "Oh, we used to take drives up here when I was a kid, and your grandfather, actually, it was his grandfather that was the German grandfather, not the Irish grandfather. Anyway, so he said we would always go look for your great great grandfather's name on the Pennsylvania monument," and I'm like, "What?"
Huh.
What? And so that's when we found out that my great great grandfather, James Kinsella from County Wicklow, who had come over during the potato famine
Mm-mm.
and ended up signing up in Philadelphia, I think, or New York. Probably came in on the boat in New York, signed up in Philadelphia um, with the Pennsylvania Volunteers, who were one of the units in the Civil War who were in almost all of the major engagements.
Yeah.
Um, and so from there, we went and talked to one of the rangers and found out we could write to the War Department, well, the Defense Department, then the War Department back in the day,
Mm.
and got all of his service records and found out all. So he was in 1862. He was at the Battle of Antietam, which is also in Maryland. Well, Gettysburg's in Pennsylvania. He was wounded on the battlefield at Antietam, put in the hospital, recuperated, still had the bullet in his thigh, goes back into service with the Pennsylvania Volunteers. 71st PA is who the unit he was with, is in the Battle of Gettysburg. The 71st Pennsylvania, where if anybody out there is familiar with Pickett's Charge, the angle is where the Pickett's Charge was concentrated on the clump of trees, but also there's a stone wall that had an angle. The 71st Pennsylvania were at the angle where the Confederate 10,000, how many of them were concentrated to come across Pickett's Charge, the Pickett's Field at the angle. At one small point, some of the Confederates broke through. A few of them broke through, got across the wall. And
Mm.
apparently, at some point, my great great grandfather, James Kinsella, was captured by the Confederates, marched across the Pickett's Charge field back to the Confederate lines, at some point marched to a train, put on a train to Richmond, put in a Confederate prison camp on Belle Isle, which is an island in the middle of the James River where many people died of dysentery and starvation. Survived that, go figure, survived that, goes to the hospital. A lot of people, if they were too ill, were maybe transferred to another unit, but then became hospital orderlies and people, that didn't have to be in battle. So I think he was at Belle Isle like maybe 5 or 6 months. Um, Survived that, lived to be 80 years old at a time when people didn't live to be 80. Well, after he got out of the Civil War, he became a Baltimore police officer. So if you
Mm.
watch the first seasons of Homicide, they show a close up of very early Baltimore police classes, or groups of police officers. We have a photo very much like that of my great great grandfather as a Baltimore police officer in the 1880s after he survived the Civil War. So yeah, so we knew some of that story, yes, while we were working on it. And so when we're shooting the Pickett's Charge scenes, when we're shooting, those kind of things, and my brother also became a reenactor after we found out my great great grandfather's history. My brother became a reenactor in that unit, 71st Pennsylvania unit. So we both have had the experiences where you sort of like try to block out for me, it was like black out the cameras and stuff and sort of feel like, could I get an inkling of what it must have been like for him to be in the middle of that chaos? But that was a really, it was all exterior shooting, lots of battles, because I was brought in because that's when they had all the extra camera stuff. Originally was on the B unit and then was sent over to the A unit to be the B camera focus puller on the B camera. So it was, that was a terrific crew. And a lot of the guys up there were Homicide, who I would later see back on Homicide because it was the Baltimore crew. We were close. There were people from LA, but a lot of the crew were from Baltimore, the grips and
Mm.
electricians and all that. So I met a lot of those guys up there. And then after that, I got on Serial Mom. I'm not quite sure what the connection was with I know Boots got me on Serial
Mm.
Mom. I know it was somebody that got from Gettysburg got me on Serial Mom. Anyway, and then Boots was the connection to Homicide. So I worked with him and Tom Lappin. I was the loader. Tom was the second on Serial Mom. And then they asked me to come on Homicide because their loader had left. And I was the loader for I came on the second season. They had been on the first, they were on the first season. I came on the second season. And then when Tom left, I bumped up to be the second. That was my connection.
So, Susan, you returned to Baltimore and are now working on Homicide. So, you mentioned Boots helped you kind of get on the show. So, what was it like kind of coming back and working in your home city? And what was it like being on that show that was very different to, sort of, should we say, the more traditionally shot projects that you'd been on prior to that?
Yeah. So before Homicide, working on Gettysburg, it was nice to be working here because I had moved back in
Mm. Mm.
1989, 1990, and did some other things while I was married, and then got back into the business. So it was literally, I made 4 phone calls to Boots and a couple other people I worked with, and not worked with, people I went to school with, Richard Chisholm and Bob Dorsey, and I don't know who the 4th person was. So it was a trip after being gone for almost 10 years to come back and to be able to work at home, especially because I had no idea what I was going to do with myself when I got divorced. And it occurred to me, oh, you used to have this really great,
Yeah. Yeah.
career. Um, so that was amazing. Um, working, that's an interesting question because obviously working in Gettysburg, I was driving an hour to get there every day, but then they put us up in the sleaziest hotel on the outskirts of Gettysburg, and they managed to pull some pennies together. Um, so I was staying out there too. But yeah, good question. Working in Baltimore, I was thinking about this morning because when you work in the film business, and you know this too, even though you're doing something different every day, if you're going from project to project, your job is the same, right? So whether I'm in Gettysburg
Mm.
or whether I'm in Baltimore, I'm going on a camera truck. I'm getting the equipment out. I'm
Yeah.
loading magazines in the morning. We're conferring about what equipment we need for the day. So the job is the same, but the circumstances
Mm.
are never the same. They're always different. So working in the city was really cool. I love Baltimore City. And I grew up in the county, but my mom grew up I mentioned this in another episode. My mom grew up in Pigtown in West Baltimore. And so when I was growing up, we did all our shopping downtown on Howard Street when all the major department stores and shoe stores were still down there. So I had a feel for it, an affinity and a love for Baltimore growing up, even though I didn't grow up in the city. So coming back into the city
Mm.
it wasn't like, oh, geez, I'm going into the city now, which a lot of people who don't live in the city feel like they're intimidated by the city. So I was happy I had that background
Mm.
of being in the city a lot because my mom was a city girl growing up. So it was nice to be working back in Baltimore. You can't argue with working in Fells Point because it was an amazing location to work in. And many of the places we went were areas that I was familiar with, except for, even the projects. My mom had taken us down to the projects. She had done a fresh air program and got some kids out of the projects. Um, one year, a
Mm.
handful of kids. And so even going into the projects, I think we even shot, my recollection is the Luther Mahoney projects that, where his community center was. My brain tells me was the same one that I went to as a kid, 9 or 10, when my mom was doing this fresh air program. We met a mother and we took like 5 kids out. And we did it for quite a few months through the summer into the winter. So working in Baltimore was really cool, but it was an easy drive and easy commute for me. So that was also good. And then I hadn't worked with 16 millimeter since college. I had never worked with Atons. Worked with other 16 millimeter cameras, but not Atons. But the handheld nature of it, I was used to from working with John Alonzo. So the idea that you're with him, and I've noticed that some of these videos that that Jay Tobias sent us, there's a little more. There was some work where we had pulled out the tripod here and there. So going back and forth between the tripod or the butt dolly or even one of the videotapes that the videos that Jay sent us had, I think, a small dolly. It wasn't a Pee-wee though. It was something anyway. So the idea of working with a handheld camera, even though it was 16 millimeter, was not different to me. I was used to working with a cameraman who would on a dime say, put it in handheld mode. So we were constantly with Alonzo going back and forth, changing the camera over, putting the handles on, that kind of thing. And I think I want to go back and look, but I think Alonzo also used 2 handles, is my recollection. I may be wrong about that. I have to go back and see if I can find any photos. So that the handheld nature of it wasn't that different, especially when I bumped up to second on Homicide, because I started as a loader. So I wasn't in the middle of everything until the season 3 or at the end of season 2. I can't remember when Tom left. But having to grab the camera off the cameraman's shoulder when I worked with Alonzo was my job, because then it leaves the first assistant's hands free and he can go do his measuring. He can confer with the cameraman. He can do whatever he needs to do. And then the second, which was me, standing there with holding the camera. So often on Homicide, didn't happen all the time, but often on Homicide, because obviously Boots and Dave also would grab it. So the idea of grabbing the camera and holding on to it while the first did what they needed to do, wasn't that different. So, I'm trying to think. I was trying to think this morning. I don't remember. I'm certain I had to settle in with the equipment because I'd never worked with an Aton before. I can't remember if when I started in the second season, I met them at the rental house and actually did the prep with them, which would have helped me a lot as far as getting familiar with the camera body and the lenses and loading the magazines. I sort of in my brain think that I did. I probably did do that. They probably asked me to come down to the rental house when they did the prep. So that would have familiarized me with the cameras too. But I don't have any specific memories of it being a difficult transition at all. Certainly,
No.
well, like just a terrific crew. So, and I knew a number of them from working on Serial Mom and Gettysburg, and also from growing up in Baltimore and going to UMBC. So the crew, many people were familiar to me. So that was really cool. I know that Tom Lappin might not like me for saying this, but I know when I started on Serial Mom, Tom was a little worried that I would come in and be an asshole Los Angeles camera assistant, that I'd been in LA for 8 or 9 years and I was going to come back and be some like egotistical know-it-all when I came and worked with them on John's movie. And he did tell me later, he said, well, I thought you were going to be an asshole because you're coming from LA and you think you know everything. And I never thought that. I never thought I knew everything.
So what are your earliest memories of being on Homicide?
Yeah, I don't know that I know any I remember anything specific. Is one of my main memories is when they asked me to do it, I was ecstatic. obviously because I was familiar with the show. I was familiar, but there had never been a TV series. You could argue that that what's the cop show that a bunch of the guys worked on, America's Most Wanted. You could argue America's Most Wanted was here quite a bit, but really a series had never been
Mm-mm-mm.
shot here. So when and if you're a freelancer and you're going from project to project, either a couple days on a commercial, a couple days on pickups, because we did a lot of pickups here for other things that had been shot here, but also even a feature film. John's feature films weren't incredibly long, a couple of months max. So, when you get asked to do a series, which is going to go 6, 7, 8 months, it's like cha-ching. I mean, I hate to say that, but it's like, wow, I have a steady job, which is what you never have as a freelancer, right? You never have a full-time job that lasts forever as a
Mm-hmm.
freelancer. So I do remember, I actually have a vivid memory of being on the camera truck on Serial Mom when he asked me and that may be a false memory, but I think that he asked me when we were finishing up Serial Mom, um, if I wanted to go on to Homicide for the second season because they had already done the first season. Um, and just being like ecstatic that he had asked me to do that. So I was like super, super duper happy to be on the show. But as far as like I went back and looked at some photos of us when it was Boots and Tom Lappin as the second and me as the loader, just shots on the street, downtown and trying to remember um even just as a I don't I don't remember except that I always loved my loading rooms when I was a loader. I always loved the way I had them set up, and there were pictures of Elvis and James Dean and, stuff, and I probably had a radio in there, I don't know. But very organized because you have to be able to find everything in the dark when you have a loading room, so you set it up the way you like it.
Well, what was a typical day like for you on Homicide then?
Well, I think we talked about this with a lot of our guests, well, especially with Boots. So, we'd get there before call time, because it was sort of considered by Jim Finnerty, and then it trickled down the line that if you weren't there before call time, you were late.
Yeah, it's a very film
In
industry thing.
Hollywood, you came on call time. You didn't come a half an hour, 20 minutes early and set the camera up because, yeah, you just didn't do that. So we'd get there half hour early, 20 minutes early, open the truck up, or the truck would be open, and between what was on the call sheet, probably the first probably would talk to Jean. I have a lot of memories of starting a lot in the squad room, but I don't know that we started a lot mornings in the squad room. I sort of feel like those were later in the week, but maybe first days we started in the squad room sometimes.
Mm,
But it
mm.
could be anywhere. It could be on the street. It could be in a house. It could be in a mansion. It could be anywhere. And so you're deciding what you need. The carts come out. You throw all the equipment you need on the carts after, let's say, so Boots builds the camera in the camera truck. There's a head in the camera truck where he can mount the camera, and we get, I give him a magazine. He puts the film on. He probably talks to Jean about what the first shots are. What kind of lens do we need? Are we using a short zoom? Are we using a prime? What are we using for starters? And then he would check everything, make sure the transmitter's working. Um, check all the electronics, make sure it has a hot battery, a fully charged battery, um, and put the camera together. And then, say if we were on the soundstage, well, not the sound, so we were in the now Pendry Hotel. When we were at the Rec Pier, there was a very long 3-story high ramp. And so we would all of us, camera, grip, electric, everybody that had craft service, everybody would be pushing our carts up this 3-story high ramp to get all the equipment up to the sets, up to the squad room sets. And then once you got in there, Jean had the camera on his shoulder. Boots would give Jean the camera, and they would do a couple of rehearsals. And like we said in earlier episodes, it wasn't the kind of strict blocking you would see in other shows where the actors are expected to go to the same place every time they do the shot and expected to hit their marks. On other shows, I think I mentioned this, like multiple pieces of colored tape all up and down my leg on my jeans that I would
Mm.
pull off and put down as marks while you're blocking the scene, which we rarely did in Homicide unless there was some set shot, like, some sort of a framed shot that needed to be done. Otherwise, there were no marks, which made it a lot easier for the second assistant, because that can be one of the most stressful things. Color coordinating the marks for 5 or 6 or 8 actors is
Yeah.
it's like ridiculous. So, a couple of run-throughs, and then, they would light the set if we were on a set or if we were in a home or in an inside location. Otherwise, out on the street, it would just, be deciding, what the exposure was gonna be and all that. We often did shots, and Boots mentioned this, where we would go from outside to inside, and, somebody would have to um, pull the f-stop as they were moving through from outside to inside. I don't remember if Boots or Jean. I don't think Jean could have been able to do that while he was moving. So Boots probably tried to do that while they were going through, from outside to inside and changing the f-stop. Um, and then all day long, normally, and I should have pulled out some call sheets, but, we might have 4 or 5 locations, and so all day long, you're packing everything up, putting everything back on the truck, getting to another location, unloading everything, putting it all back on the cart or carts if we had, more than one camera all day long, or some of the time, we would have 2 carts. Um, you just do that all day long, loading, unloading the trucks and reconfiguring whatever you needed camera-wise for whatever scene you were doing. So it was a lot of movement all day long, unless for whatever reason, maybe we had days where we were in the squad room all day, and then you
Yeah.
get a little
Yeah.
bit of a breather.
Okay. Okay. Do you have any memories of working with the cast that you'd like to share? Because it was such an amazing cast.
Well, I think I mentioned earlier, walking on the set and having Yaphet recognize me and a big smile and, saying hello and, "What are you doing here?" kind of thing. "Nice to see you." That was really nice. I wasn't certainly familiar with Ned Beatty, um, which was a thrill to be working with him. Um, so Yaphet and Ned I knew. The other cast members, I wasn't really familiar with. I should have been familiar with Isabella when she came along, but I forgot that I had worked with her before. Um, so Andre and Kyle and, Richard Belzer I also had worked with before on Scarface. He played a stand-up comedian in the nightclub scenes in Scarface. So I was familiar with him, and he didn't know me because that was he wasn't there the whole show. Um, so watching them obviously was it was amazing to watch that ensemble cast do what they did, and
Mm,
also, we've
mm,
talked about this before, everybody learning to dance around with the camera. I mean, for Jean to be moving through those 5, 4, 5, 6, 8 characters and having them sort of, like the Red Sea parting for the camera crew as it goes through and going back to their spots and always being on as the camera shifted around and swung around to them unexpectedly. And I know many of them have said that was exciting because they could never be off. They were never off camera. I had worked on many shows, many traditionally shot shows where the star might leave. Like, let's say we do a close up on them and then we swing around to do a close up on the supporting actor that's in the scene, and the star goes off to their trailer, and an assistant director or somebody's reading the lines to the supporting actor. So everybody having to be there and be on all the time definitely was different, for sure.
mm,
Definitely different
mm.
than the traditional films and television shows I'd been on before. Um, there was also just sort of, and I know people talk about you throw away the bad memories. You only remember the good stuff. People say that about childbirth, right? Why would you have a second child after going through that horrible pain? It's because the body says, "Don't remember that," right?
Mm.
Certainly we had difficult days. I certainly had blow-ups with people off and on. not as much on Homicide as I had toe to toe with some people on other shows I'd been on. It was and you can tell, I think, too, if you've watched those videos that Jay has given us, there was a lightness and there was you know, I don't wanna overstate it, but sort of a joy on that set. I think everybody just, I mean, that video he sent us the other day, we were all so totally, like, almost unrecognizable.
And it's a very serious episode. Yeah.
Yeah, that was a Requiem for Adina, but almost
Mm.
unrecognizable in all our gigantic layers of clothing. So we're outside. If we had that much clothes on, it was probably 20 degrees or below, and we're outside all day in that. And yet everybody's joking around and fun. And I mean, you know, I mean, I'm sure that there obviously we all had our days when we weren't in a good mood, and there were crew people and cast members that weren't necessarily happy all the time.
Yes, yeah.
But I do remember there being, once we got into that rhythm with Jean, because of course when I started, that was a new cameraman for them, but it was not new for me because I wasn't on season 1, so it wasn't some kind of weird shift for me. But they were starting with a new cameraman. And, I think and Jean had such a great attitude that super trickled down to the whole set. Jean's, you know, really playfulness and loving what he was doing. So, that's one of the things I remember, is how pleasant a set it was to be on
Mm.
pretty much all the time. I mean, you know, we had horrible locations and we had horrible situations for sure. Um, but yeah, that's one of the main memories. What was the question?
Mm, mm. Just working with the actors, what was it like?
The actors.
Actors, schmactors, yeah.
Yeah, I don't remember anything specific except that they were so good. You know, I mean, obviously everybody points out Andre, you know, because he was like the Shakespearean, you know, actor, you know, in his sort of delivery. But everybody was so good. Yaphet was so, everybody was so good. Melissa was just terrific. Um, I think it was just a pleasure watching all of them. You
Mm,
know, they were
mm.
all terrific.
Yeah. One question I did want to ask you was, did you find the topic of the show challenging? Because especially as it took inspiration from local murders and you being a Baltimorean.
Well, it's interesting. I had recently moved back. Well, not that
Mm,
recently. I had moved back in '89. So, but you know what do we get desensitized? Like we're desensitized now at some level. Um, there was almost a murder a day in Baltimore when we were shooting that show. And it sort of became, and it sounds terrible, but it was sort of like that's the way it is, right? Um, it was also that way in many other cities across the country. Um, so I think less being disturbed by the subject matter and more being pleased or even proud that we were working on a show that was, first of all, based on that amazing source material, based on David Simon's amazing book. But that it was throwing light on that in a way that I don't think had been done before. That we weren't working on a back lot pretending it was downtown Baltimore. You know, we
mm,
weren't on the
mm,
Universal, you know, New York Street back lot acting like it was Baltimore. We were in Baltimore and we were in the neighborhoods where those murders were occurring and the drug dealing was occurring and the overdose deaths were occurring. So, in some ways, it felt good that we were shining a light on it. It also, in some ways, felt weird because of the disparity between, you know, here we are, a bunch of working people coming into a depressed neighborhood that has had no attention thrown on it, where people um, often, even in those horrible situations, you know, getting up and going to work and, you know, people trying to live their lives, but in
mm,
difficult situations. So it it was, you couldn't ignore it, right? You couldn't ignore the disparity and you couldn't ignore the poverty and you couldn't ignore, I mean, we mentioned this before. We would work on streets where the entire block, there might be, let's say there's 20 homes on the block. 15 of them might be vacant and boarded up,
Mm.
and or the boarded up doors broken through and people trying to live in them, in a vacant home. And in between, people trying to still live their lives, people still getting up and going to work. Um, and some of the neighborhoods just felt like bombed out shells. I mean, it really, in that way, yes, was depressing. I wrote a series of poems about just my impressions of 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 working in these depressed, sad areas. But I did feel like we were at least throwing some light on it. Whether it helped anything or not, I have no idea. But I think it might have made more people maybe aware of things. It also may have, reinforced stereotypes, unfortunately.
Mm.
So, yeah. I mean, we would be in a neighborhood like that, out there happy as larks to have a job, right? And be joking around, even though we were in a very depressed area. Like the scene from the Requiem for a Demon where they're breaking the door down. Um, we're all out there joking around, and it's a sad, depressed neighborhood and with a bunch of
Yeah.
vacant homes.
Yeah. Were there any episodes that you worked on that stand out for you that that you're proud of? And then was it also like revisiting the show now as a viewer?
I wouldn't necessarily say there are any specific ones I'm particularly, quote, end quote, proud of because, so far down the line as a second assistant, like, I'm not making creative decisions. Um, I think it was more of the episodes where it's like, "Wow, I got through that day proud." Like,
Mm.
driving
Mm.
home sort of exhilarated that we had gotten through that, whatever that was. The ones that stand out often are the ones that were the most physically challenging or the ones that were, the most distressing just from, like I was talking about before, from a poverty sort of,
Mm.
situation. And one of my most vivid memories is the fire part 1 and 2 because the warehouse fire that we shot, I mean, we were obviously, we were there with the cameras burning down a warehouse, and I was on the B camera with, I'm pretty sure it was Bob Dorsey, who was also somebody I knew from UMBC, and we were standing across the street. The warehouse was fully engulfed. All of the windows were completely pouring out, 10-foot high flames. And, same thing, like with was talking about the Kodiak bear earlier. I'm like, I have the focus whip on, and I'm trying to get behind as far behind Bob as I can get because the heat is almost unbearable. The heat is almost unbearable, and I'm across the street. So, there were situations like that that, I mean, you're working in front of a half a block long burning warehouse.
Mm.
Yeah, that's gonna stick in your memory. So real quick, other episodes, the one that somebody else has talked about where Richard Belzer pulls out a drawer and like a million literally like a million
Yeah.
cockroaches go everywhere. And I remember banging the slate in that house and jumping into the bathroom and just being like, oh, ooh. And being in abandoned buildings, quite honestly, where people had gone in there to defecate.
Mm.
So we were in some really challenging places. But then we were also in some of these beautiful mansions, in Roland Park. So the contrast there was also pretty striking to go in a mansion in Roland Park and the next day be in an empty building with toilet paper, on the floor.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Oh
and
my
the
goodness.
sniper episode also, I remember because we were on top of those buildings, and I remember going up inside the Broma Seltzer Tower, which is actually a copy of the tower in Florence, the Florence Clock Tower. That's what the Broma Seltzer Tower is a copy of. And I remember going up the ladder onto the roof and trying to hold onto the camera with one arm and trying to go up the ladder with the other arm. I'm not quite sure how we did that. Um, that was pretty challenging, and also that was really disgusting because the whole inside of the place before you got to the roof was literally, I'm not kidding you, caked in like inches of
Mm.
pigeon crap.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
the
You can
kind of
get
things, those are the kind of things that,
yeah.
that you remember, as well as being in the box with some of this, the stars, people
Mm.
that,
Mm.
and the guest stars that we had, Robin Williams and Chris Rock and well, Charles Durning, I just watched that episode last night. He was just terrific. That was a cool episode because it had the flashbacks to the 30s. I remember being in that junkyard after the rain in the completely muddy junkyard full of derelict cars. Yeah.
So why do you think Homicide still resonates today?
I think as I'm re-binging it again, I think the honesty in the writing and the performances,
Mm.
just really comes through. Obviously, there's times when the writing and the performances aren't perfect, but I think that it sort of feels like it scrubs through many layers of fakeness. There seems
Mm.
to be an honesty about it that I think still rings true. And obviously, I just mentioned the source material from David's book and how irrelevant that still is. Obviously, well, our murder rate has dropped here fairly dramatically. And our non-fatal shootings have dropped fairly dramatically here in the last few years. But all the other social issues are still there. Crime, racism, classism, sexism, justice or no justice. All those things, and how complex and complicated all those things are, and how people struggle with. I mean, even just talking about what it was like working, being a white girl, making a good living, coming from the
Mm.
suburbs and
Mm.
driving into this horribly depressed, poverty-ridden areas. You struggle with that yourself philosophically too. But also you mentioned earlier the humor. It really is funny and funny in these weirdly honest ways, like the kinds of conversations that you have with friends that may not m have anything to do with anything,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
but they're
yeah.
the kind of things that you talk about in real life,
Yeah,
and
shooting the shit as we call
yeah,
it, shooting the shit.
exactly. So yeah, all those things, and somehow, like I said earlier episodes, I mean, besides maybe the clothes a little bit here and there, maybe a hairstyle, maybe a dress that has, you know, the shoulder pads are too big, but it doesn't even look it doesn't look 30 years old either. I'm not quite sure why.
Well, it's
Uh,
because society hasn't changed that much. I think it's actually that episode of Sniper, isn't it? The second episode where Pembleton says that originality stopped in, was it 1987 or something? There was a
right.
particular year he mentioned that originality has stopped, and in some respects, yeah, society is just sort of repeating itself. There's no distinctive fashions any longer, are there? We don't, like the 60s, you think of the 60s as distinctive clothing you could think of,
Yeah,
and
and
the
the big hair
70s,
from
but
the
and
'80s,
the
and it was
80s.
a little
Yeah.
bit of that here and there, but that was sort of worn off by the time you got to the '90s, and I think because the detectives are sort of all sort of rumpled regular people, there wasn't the fashion to laugh at. Like, you'd look at some, TV shows and movies from the '90s, and, like, you're laughing at the gel in the hair and the, whatever the styles were then, and I just think there was sort of a classic wardrobe, props to the wardrobe department, that still makes it not look weirdly old or out of fashion.
Yeah, I feel like we're in an era right now where people's clothes do look like the 90s. A lot of people wear stuff that I remember people wearing when I was a teenager, I'm like, okay, yeah, certain things have come back.
Oh,
So,
interesting.
well, is there anything else you'd like to add before we sort of wrap up today? Anything that's sort of
Ask me the
important to you
food
about Homicide?
question.
Well, yeah, okay. What are your food recommendations for Baltimore?
Well, there's recommendations, and then there's what we ate. So,
Yes, yes.
recommendations would be like what I steered you to when you came, which is you definitely have to have a crab cake. Because people that say, "Oh, I've had a crab cake," and they live in, like, San Francisco or they live in
Mm.
Florida, it's not the same. So you have to have a Maryland crab cake when you're here, and ask somebody when you're here, where's a good place to get a good crab cake? Um, and obviously the steamed crabs also, I would say, unless maybe you're in Louisiana, are gonna be good and different than other kinds of steamed crabs you've had. The other thing, and we mentioned this in the other episodes, it was really nice to have the Daily Grind across the street.
Mm.
from the sets, because you could go over there and get a coffee, get a latte. I was trying to remember what my coffee drink was, and I was thinking maybe latte, but then in the summer, it was always the granitas, which was the frozen coffee, which were amazing. Um, and then when we were out on location, if we weren't gonna eat off the catering truck, it was finding a sub place, some Italian neighborhood sub place, or obviously, no joke, the fried gizzards from, Joe and Josh and
Yes.
whoever went to the corner store. Those were always really good. But then locally, there's a thing called burger cookies, which are
Mhm.
really well known, which are half of the cookie is chocolate ice cream, ice cream icing, and half the cookie is a soft sort of vanilla cookie. It's hard to
Oh,
explain
interesting. Yeah.
unless you had one. They're amazing.
Yeah.
Um, and also, if you go to any bakery in Baltimore, they'll have chocolate top cookies, which is a little different from a burger cookie, but chocolate top cookies are a thing here as well. And and then I do remember eating at Cooper's and the burgers and fries there. And then when I think Boots mentioned when we worked nights, the catering truck would be there when we got there at 3 or 4 in the afternoon for call time. And it was the one time we would have cheeseburgers. We didn't have
Oh,
cheeseburgers
nice.
normally, but at night shoots, they would make cheeseburgers for us. And then there was also if you could get to the catering truck in the morning, a breakfast burritos or quesadillas in the morning. I used to love just a cheese quesadilla in the morning. But but yeah, and there was tons of places in Fells Point to go and grab something when we were on the sets, to go and grab a sandwich or a sub. So that was something we were always working on in the morning. Where are we going for lunch? Who's going to make the lunch run? What are we going to get?
Yeah.
Just like in the squad room sets where they were making Andre and other people go out and get the but pizza we did pizza sometimes because Brick Oven Pizza up on Broadway was a good place to go run and get a pizza
That
at
sounds good. Yeah.
lunchtime. But yeah, it was yeah, fun stuff.
Yeah, yeah. I was just thinking about my trip to Baltimore. I really enjoyed Patango's, that coffee place. That was really
Mhm.
cool, which was just opposite the Pendry. That was a very cool little coffee shop, actually, I thought.
And that back in the day when we were shooting on Homicide, that part of the building was an old school antique slash seafaring themed junk shop.
Excellent.
With like the old
Yeah.
diver Dan diving helmets and weird stuff. And then after that, it was I believe a Bonaparte bakery before. And I had never been to Patango till you
Mm.
came to visit. And then of course
Ah,
next to
okay.
that was where our morgue sets
Yes,
were, which is
yes,
now a
that's it.
cafe, which is kind of funny.
Yeah, yeah, that bit's a fancy wine bar, I think, isn't
Right.
it? If I remember correctly, is yeah, 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 yeah. No, brilliant. And so we went to Jimmy's for the steamed crab, didn't we? And then it was Phillips for the crab cakes, which were very nice.
Right, right.
And
Phillips. Yeah, Phillips. We got to Phillips late. It was just at the end of the steamed crab season. And they're like, we don't have steamed crabs. I'm like,
oh, I
oh my
know,
God,
yeah.
Chris, what are we gonna do? So yeah,
Had to
so
come
you had
back.
you had the crab cake and I had the soft crab sandwich so you could see what
That's
it
it.
was like to pull the legs off the soft crab, the fried
Yeah.
soft crab and eat it. Um,
Oh,
yeah,
that
that
was
was good. And
cool.
Jimmy's famous. I always have to say Jimmy's famous seafood in Dundalk, not Jimmy's, which is in the show in Fells Point, which is unfortunately no longer open.
Yeah. Yes, yeah, because that was where that was the diner where the, at the end of Sniper, where they were having a chat about originality. Yeah, I've got a little bit of footage of that's now closed, but it's, yeah,
Yeah,
cool
and I had
place.
forgotten the last bunch of episodes I've been rewatching in season 6. There were a lot of scenes in Jimmy's.
Mm.
Um, and I'd forgotten how much we had shot in there. They had good fried egg sandwiches. I do remember getting the
Oh,
fried
nice.
egg sandwiches.
Nice. Sounds good, sounds good. Well, I think that's a good place to wrap up, I think, for today. So it's been 1 year of Homicide life on the set, and thank you everybody for joining us on this journey. And again, thank you so much, Susan, for A, answering the email, and B, setting this all up and just, joining me on this amazing journey that we've been on.
Yeah, well, thanks for sending that initial email, and I guess we should have thanked all of our guests,
Well,
along the
yes, we should
line.
thank our guests. Yeah, yeah.
Jean was the first one, and Kyle, and Josh and Joe, and David Simon, and Melissa, and Isabella, and Tony Lewis, and Reed Diamond, and of course Tom Fontana, and Julie Martin, and Jorge Zamacona were the second. They were actually the second ones, and Boots, and who am I forgetting? Did I get everybody?
Isabella?
I mentioned
Got
Isabella.
Isabella.
Yeah. The sound guys, Lorenzo and Paul.
Yes.
That was a terrific
Yeah,
episode.
and the ADs,
Right,
Jay,
and
Frank, and Miles.
yeah, Jay,
Yep.
Frank, and Miles. That was terrific.
Yeah, that was
Everybody
great.
has been so much fun to talk to. I just have to say that. Everybody has been so candid and so entertaining and so just a joy to like reconnect with. And it was really fun to have Jean on a second time with Nick
Yes.
Gomez. I thought
that was fun.
Yeah, that was I thought a really good deep dive into
Yeah.
sort of like the artistic philosophy that they had about the way they wanted to shoot film and what it meant to them to be able
Yeah.
to shoot film that way. That was a terrific conversation. So, and we hope everybody will keep listening, because we do have plans to keep going, and we have some people lined up for the coming year, including more cast and crew and creators. And did we want to mention we're taking a break in April? We'll be back in May.
Well, yes. So we're going to be taking a small hiatus over April just to kind of get ourselves back into the rhythm of things. So we'll be returning in May. We will return on May the 15th, and we'll have a brand new episode for you. And we will continue on monthly, hopefully for at least another year, maybe more. We'll see how we get on, because we've got lots of ideas of different people to chat to.
Yes.
We will keep doing it as long as we find interesting people to talk to. So.
Yes, and we just made connection with a bunch of people that haven't been on yet that we're all excited to come on. So we're looking forward to those.
Yeah. Well, you was just saying earlier there are about 6,000 people involved in Homicide.
That's
There's
what I
potential a lot of
said,
interviews
right.
that
I never
potentially-
counted. It seems like when you scroll through IMDb, it's just the actors and the directors is about 6,000, right?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
maybe, I don't know if there'll be that many interviews, but certainly be quite a few. So thank you again, everybody, for listening and for your support over this year. It's meant a lot to us. And it's been nice just sort of bumping into people now and chatting about what Homicide means to them and how much they're enjoying the podcast, which is great to hear. So, thank you again, everybody, for listening. And we will catch you on the next episode.
Thanks to the super fans out there that also will hopefully get a couple on to just talk about being fans and still following the show.
So in the months ahead, we'll probably be reaching out to some of our super fans as well to see what sort of Homicide meant for them and how it's inspired them, because we know there are some listeners who went on into careers in law enforcement and other things too that kind of are related around this sort of topic, and some have even gone on to make movies and things like that. So we're going to try and sort of find some interesting people who've got an interesting story to share about how Homicide sort of changed their life and inspired them on the path that they're on. So keep an eye out for that too. And if you have an interesting story, feel free to drop us a message on any of our social channels. And so thank you again, everybody, for listening, and we'll catch you on the next episode. It'll be May the 15th. Take care.
See you soon.
Bye for now.
Thank you.